the radio tower.
That kind of
Yeah, right, I know. You can't see it. Now that one you can see.
Hey, folks, the on-air light is on. We are ready, and I want to welcome everyone this evening. It's a beautiful summer evening, and I'm going to call the meeting to order, and would all of you like to join us in the Pledge Allegiance to the flag?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call. Here.
Here.
Collins.
Here.
Johnson. Here. Ellen.
Here.
Kopsinski.
Here.
Olson. Thank you.
All right, we do have a couple special presentation, and first is from the Lynn County Health Department. I would like to invite up our Lynn County Health Administrator, Mr. Frank Moore. And Frank, there's a remote right there in front of you.
This one?
Yes.
Does that work? Testing? Got it. Okay. Well, first off, I need to apologize to a couple of my guests tonight in that if you were to ask any of my ex-wives, and I'm not telling you how many there are, they all would agree that I'm incapable of telling a lie. And what I would say is that on a ruse, I am able to get at least two people here today that I think have done some pretty amazing things for Albany and in turn also Lynn County. And there's a third person who's up behind the dais in Marilyn Smith. I like that look. Who I think deserves some recognition. And I think, I had talked with the mayor some time ago about this, and normally I'm, quick enough on my feet that I don't need to write things down, but as I thought about it, there's a lot that I wanted to make sure I say. And so what I do want to say is that, I think we have three women here in Marilyn and Mal and Terry Knoll who've selflessly given of their professional and personal time to improve the quality of life for all residents of Albany and Lynn County as tireless advocates for some of our most vulnerable citizens. They lead with a subtlety and a grace that belies the true value of their contributions to our community. Over the last decade, they have been the backbone, the heart, and the drivers of the 10-year plan to end homelessness and all of those efforts that we put together, and people like me get to show up for, but they're really the people who put it all together, and they're the ones who've sustained it and kept it going. They each, in their own inimitable way, provide leadership that sustains our efforts to serve those less fortunate in our community, and do so with grace and a solid sense of purpose that can only have its genesis and sustenance derived from hearts and souls founded in compassion for others. Finally, they do what they do altruistically, and I frequently, and I don't know whether I got this from Marilyn, but and some of the kind of the journalism stuff that I've learned from her, but I never use a word without looking it up. So when I looked up altruistically, the definition is unselfishly concerned or devoted to the welfare of others, parentheses, as opposed to egoistic. I think we have an opportunity here to visibly acknowledge three women, three members of our community, three citizens who quite frankly don't really care if other people see the work that they do on a day-to-day basis, and let other people take center stage a lot of the time. And without these three, much of what we've done in this community, whether it has to do with homelessness, whether it has to do with other issues that I think directly impact the quality of life in Albany and in my role with Lynn County, would not happen. And I think that's why I'm here tonight. We have some certificates of appreciation for the three of you. That means that you don't have to give the presentations that I said that you were going to be giving. I told them that they were giving a somewhere between a 3 to 5 minute presentation to the City of Albany Human Relations Commission. So if you could pretend to be the City of Albany Human Relations Commission for just a couple of seconds, my lie won't be quite as big.
And you would have done it in exactly 3 minutes.
She would have. I know. That's
Mayor, you want to do the honors?
Okay. So smile. This is for your selfless commitment and dedication to Albany's annual Heart to Heart Resource Fair and for being one of the pillars for this event. And Terry Knoll, the same, and thank you so much. And Marilyn, don't blame me, this was all Frank's idea, okay?
I haven't heard from him for a
Oh,
while.
yes, I
How
know.
sneaky.
And there's yours. Thank you. Yes. So, and Frank, don't you take off, okay? And would you like to come up here? And also, would Commissioner Nyquist like to come up here?
I didn't see my boss in the back of the room.
Well, so I hope you didn't think that, boy, you're going to be doing this presentation and I'm not going to be doing something for you.
Halfway to the door.
Well, when you brought it up, and I thought it is so generous, so kind of you to give recognition to these wonderful ladies, and they are just fantastic in our community because I know how hard they have worked for helping the homeless in our community. But also, you have, I don't think, you give yourself credit enough for how you have been such a strong voice with a lot of knowledge of really knowing how can we be a better service to the homeless in our community. Also, folks that have, are in the mental health system, you have been wonderful in our community. He's been very dedicated, being on the 10-year homeless plan and the continuance of the committee of the 10-year homeless plan, being on the Heart Board, any kind of issue that we see in the community that really sort of needs to be kind of evaluated. You run it by Frank and you get a good solid direction to go. Frank, we really appreciate you here in Albany, all that you have done for Albany's community. So with this certificate, it says, for your selfless commitment and dedication in addressing Albany's homeless and people with disabilities and your longtime continuing support for the Heart Board and Heart to Heart Resource Fairs.
Thank you.
Okay? Thank you. Did you want to say anything?
Well done. And I thought he only gave service like that to his boss. Well done, Frank. The other thing you got to know is if there's a need for the homeless and he doesn't deliver, he's got to answer to the mayor. And doing the work is easier than the homeless not getting the services they need. So thank you all very much at the city. And Frank, well done. Can't commend you enough.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks. Thank you. I'm kind of amazed that we were able to pull that off too and surprise them without them knowing. And mostly with Marilyn, it was we had to kind of sneak some things around so you wouldn't see it on anyone's desk.
Things by Marilyn.
I'm
Yeah.
too busy to go snooping.
Yeah, so thank you. Okay, and our next presentation is, this is the Santiam Calapooya Scenic Bikeway, and we have some folks here representing that project. And Bill Pintard, would you like to come forward?
Is it still live or not?
Nope, I turned the switch off.
I think it is now.
Yep, great, thanks.
As some of you folks already know me, I'm on the Albany Bicycle Pedestrian Commission, but I'm not speaking on their behalf tonight. This is a proposal that we have put together. It's a group of about 6 people that are all members of Santiam Spokes Bicycle Club, and we're making a proposal to institute a new bicycle path, trail, whatever you'd like to call it. It's called a scenic bikeway. The current scenic bikeway, the Willamette Scenic Bikeway, as you may know, goes through Albany. It starts at Calapooya, or Champoeg Park and goes all the way to Eugene. It's 132 miles. Our proposal is to create a new path that will connect to that at Brownsville. The new path will go from Brownsville to the east, and then we'll go up into Sweet Home. From Sweet Home, it will go to Lebanon, and then back around to Brownsville. It's 73 miles. What is this all about? Well, it's all about tourism. That's what the scenic bikeways are. They bring money to the cities because the bicycle tourists spend money. Believe me, they do. I've been there. Restaurants, motels, and other businesses get affected by it. So why are we bringing this to you? We want a letter of support from the city of Albany for this proposal. The proposal will be made to the Oregon Parks and Rec Department, and they will evaluate our proposal along with others and make a decision as to whether they agree to it and support it. There are 12 of these in Oregon now that have been designated. The Willamette Scenic Bikeway was the first one to be designated. But now there are 12 of them. They are all over the state, and they bring tourists into Oregon to experience the beauty. Two other members of the committee that have been working on this proposal are here tonight, Roger Gaither and Doug Rollin. And Doug, you want to talk a little bit?
I could just say a few words.
Okay.
As Bill mentioned, the route does not affect Albany directly. So you're saying, why are we up here asking you guys for a letter of support? Well, the beauty of the route is that it connects with the Willamette Valley Scenic Bikeway, which does go through Albany. And another major factor is we have an Amtrak station here. And so the synergy or the enhancement of one route for the other, it produces a synergy that I think benefits all the communities involved in that big circle. And that's why we're here tonight, is asking for that letter of support. And there's, on the back of the brochure, which I think most of you folks already have, there's some templates for those letters of support. And we would really appreciate it. I think it's a win-win situation for everybody involved, and we're going to go for it. So.
Oh, it sounds wonderful. Yeah. So, is that it? Bill?
Well, just if anybody has any questions regarding the Scenic Bikeway program and what our proposal is.
Any questions? Okay, now, Rich.
Very nice pamphlet. You told us a great big upside. Is there any downside? Is there a restriction on vehicles at any point, or lowering of speed limits, or, you know, is it only an upside, or are there other things that also go along with it, that where we would, or someone else would, have to abide by some extra rules or something?
Right. Personally, I don't see any downside, but maybe some others might. I can't see what that might be. It is going to bring people from not just Oregon, but Washington and the rest of the country here. You folks may not know that, but the Willamette Valley Scenic Bikeway brings people from the East Coast, from all over the United States and foreign countries to ride here. We had an experience, I don't know, what was it, about a year ago. We ran into a couple from Ireland, and they were out on the bikeway, riding the bikeway. And we just crossed paths with them, you know. People do know about Oregon, and they do know about the scenic bikeways. As far as downsides, I can't think of anything. There's no restrictions on speed. They still have to, any cyclist still has to abide by all traffic laws. I can't see any downside.
Okay, I guess I would ask that of staff if there is, if staff knows of anything. If not, great, fine, thank you. Well, but you don't count because you're biased. And Roger can't say anything either, and Hassel can't because he's also prejudiced. And, no, seriously, if there are no downsides, what's wrong, you know?
You're right, Rich, I am biased, but
Then-
just as someone who has ridden portions of the bikeway at different times, I can tell you that, and you've driven it, I'm sure. Anybody that's been down 99, I think, has been on pieces of it. It adds some traffic. Certainly there, you could conceive of that, I guess, as a downside, but I felt perfectly safe taking a group of about 15 Boy Scouts on a trip between here and Eugene on the bikeway. And
Well, my thought was, would there be a restriction at some point for other commerce or, drivers or whatever, above and beyond what it would be just if you or I or someone else were riding down the highway on a bicycle? And it just-
I think the short answer is no.
And the short answer is, thank you.
Yeah, one piece we haven't addressed is the bike-friendly city, or bike-friendly business program. That's in that brochure. A business can apply for being a bike-friendly business, and then they get a sign that they can post in their window. What is expected is that they will welcome bike tourists and provide facilities for them. The only one that I know in town that has already done this is Sybaris, but there may be other businesses that have applied and have not gotten accepted yet. What does it mean? It means business. It brings commerce into the city.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, council, would you like to have a letter of support written?
See why not?
Sure.
Okay, so do you want to have it, just have Wes sign it, or do you want it from me on behalf of all of you? How would you like it written?
From the mayor.
There, okay, all right. We will take care of that then. So we'll
Thank you,
get
Mayor.
that, and is there a deadline for this? Yeah, Bill, is there a deadline time that we need a letter submitted?
We have a deadline, but we would like to have all of our letters of support by December, which gives you plenty of time to get it done.
Plenty of time. I was sitting to work thinking you needed it next week. I was just finishing off one today, so.
Well, we're soliciting letters, obviously, from other organizations that may be impacted as well, so.
Okay, great. We will get that to you, and you want us to submit it to you? Just-
Doug Robin is the kind of chair of our committee.
Okay.
The letter goes to the Oregon
State.
Park and
Yeah.
Rec.
Okay,
Should it go to,
But if you would send,
We'll send it.
the instructions are in the.
Okay.
yeah.
we'll take care of it. Yeah, great, okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, is that it, council? All right. Next, we have scheduled business, and this is a quasi-judicial public hearing. So bear with me, I got a long script to have to read here. So on tonight's agenda is a quasi-judicial public hearing regarding planning file CU 0114. This is a quasi-judicial de novo public hearing regarding an appeal of the Planning Commission's decision to deny the conditional use application. The location of the property is immediately south of 1122 53rd Avenue Southwest. The applicant is Verizon Wireless LLC. I call to order this quasi-judicial public hearing at 7:34 p.m. And do any members wish to declare a conflict of interest? Do any members wish to report any ex parte contact? Okay. Nope, the only contact I had was just from Mr. Roger Nyquist yesterday, just asking about the hearing that he was going to be attending this evening. And do any members wish to report a site visit? And I think many of us probably drive by the location many times. And do any members wish to abstain from participating in the proceedings? Okay. Does anyone wish to challenge the City Council's right to determine this matter or the participation of any counselor in this hearing and decision? All right. All right. If you wish to testify, please sign in at the table next to the meeting recorder, just where the DH recorder is, or reporter is too. So, for all those wishing to testify, please be aware that you must raise an issue with enough detail to afford the council and parties an opportunity to respond to the issue if you later want to raise that issue on appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals. Testimony and evidence must be directed towards approval standards staff will describe or other criteria in the comprehensive plan or development code that you believe apply to the decision. If additional documents or evidence are provided by any party, the City Council may allow a continuance or leave the record open to allow the parties a reasonable opportunity to respond. Any continuance or extension of the record requested by the applicant shall result in a corresponding extension to the 120-day limit. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with enough detail to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. At this time, I call for the staff report from Planner Melissa Anderson.
Thank you very much, Mayor, Council. Tonight is a public hearing, and it's regarding an appeal of a conditional use application. It's a proposal for a telecommunications facility. The applicant is Verizon Wireless, and the Planning Commission had denied this application, so the applicant is here requesting a public hearing for appealing that decision. Now, the project is to develop a 120-foot tall monopole telecommunications tower. It would be have 12 panels, but also capable of co-location. Those would be panels just below the proposed antennas there on the top. And also it would have 6 equipment cabinets on a pad about 30 by 50 feet, and then with a side obscuring fence around that leased area. The location is just off of 53rd Avenue. The location is just behind the existing bowling alley, and the property is unaddressed right now, but just south of the property addressed at 1122 53rd Avenue Southwest. So tonight, this process is a quasi-judicial public hearing. It's what we term a Type 3 process. Initially, there was a neighborhood meeting and also public notice, mailing and posted notice on the property, then a Planning Commission public hearing on this application. The Planning Commission had denied the application, and then the applicant appealed this decision to the City Council. So here we are tonight. We have again posted a notice on the property and mailed out notice to property owners within 1,000 feet of this site. This is a public hearing tonight, and it is termed a de novo hearing, which is starting anew. You can add new evidence to the record where it's like a fresh start in terms of hearing this application. And tonight, we ask that the City Council make a tentative decision. The options could be to approve it with conditions, or to deny the application. And then we would come back with findings in support of that decision on the September 10th meeting. If there is an appeal of the Council's decision, that will go to the State Land Use Board of Appeals. Now, the site is a combination of zones. It's a combination of a mixed-use commercial zone as well as open space zone, as well as some overlays. We have a floodplain overlay, and these overlays essentially mirror the boundaries of the open space zone. So we have floodplain, also the riparian corridor, and significant wetlands. And the proposal, though, is to be located in the mixed-use commercial zone. Now, this also is an image that shows kind of the relative location of the pad of where the tower would be. It's about 100 feet from the floodplain boundary, 150 feet away from the riparian corridor, about 40 feet away or behind the existing bowling alley, and about 200 feet away from the right-of-way at 53rd Avenue. This is an image, a concept image of what the proposed tower would look like. This is as though you were standing at the mini golf site looking towards the bowling alley. And this is as if you were standing on 53rd Avenue looking towards the bowling alley. And this would be as if you were standing at Pacific Avenue looking towards the bowling alley. Now, the review criteria for this decision is conditional use criteria. That's in our Albany Development Code 2.250. There's 6 criteria. Also, we need consistency with the mixed-use zoning district in terms of what is allowed, the permitted uses in the zone. And also, there are special design standards for telecommunication facilities that are over 50 feet tall. So in the code, that would be 8.500 criteria 1 through 10. And for a conditional use permit, this is a kind of a unique type of a permit. It's not a site plan review. It's not an over-the-counter permitted use that's allowed outright. It's a conditional use, and it's applied in the mixed-use commercial zone when you have a tower that's proposed to be over 50 feet in height. And so that involves discretionary criteria and also a public hearing. So, and I just had a quote just to kind of give you the flavor of the intent of the conditional use or the impact of conditional use permit is that the code states the conditional use review process provides an opportunity to allow the use when it will have minimal impacts, or to allow the use but impose conditions to address identified concerns, or to deny the use if the concerns cannot be resolved. So just to clarify that, by going through the process doesn't automatically grant one a conditional use permit. We do have to meet all the criteria, and we're actually unable to approve the application unless all the criteria are met. Now, there are 3 criteria that in the staff analysis have not been met. So I just wanted to outline these and give you the actual language of the criteria. So one is conditional use criteria 1. The proposed use is consistent with the intended character of the base zone and the operating characteristics of the neighborhood. Also, conditional use criteria 2 is the proposed use will be compatible with existing or anticipated uses in terms of size, building scale and style, intensity, setbacks, and landscaping, or the proposal calls for mitigation of differences in appearance or scale through such means as setbacks, screening, landscaping, or other design features. As you can see, both of these criteria are fairly discretionary, and that's why a conditional use goes to a public hearing as opposed to a staff decision. Lastly, criteria 6 in the design review criteria for cell towers is also problematic in terms of meeting this criteria. And it states that towers should be located in an area where they are unobtrusive and do not substantially detract from aesthetics or neighborhood character due to either location, nature of surrounding uses, or lack of visibility caused by natural growth or other factors. So in the staff analysis, we've identified that in this location, this is one of the zones that's the mixed-use village center zoning district. And what's intended for that area is a pedestrian-oriented center that is small-scale retail. You may have office uses, live-work spaces, and residential uses. It is definitely not an industrial type of a zone, and it's not a heavy commercial zone either. Now, based on the testimony that the applicant gave, it's not feasible to reduce the height and scale because it wouldn't meet the needs that they have in terms of the height to serve customers. And also that the height and scale and location we found are not compatible with the existing but also anticipated uses, because essentially the height and the scale of this, it'll be 100 feet taller than the existing bowling alley, 70 feet taller than the maximum building height of the mixed-use commercial zone. The maximum height there is 50 feet. So there is quite a bit of distinction. So we found that the height and scale is rather industrial in character, not necessarily compatible with the pedestrian-oriented, mixed-use village center. Also that co-location, although we want to see co-location, co-locating on this tower in this particular area will actually just kind of exacerbate the height and scale difference of this tower. And on this particular site, it's already relatively small, and it has natural resource constraints in terms of the overlay of that open space overlay. So the development area is relatively small, but if we were to develop, if the tower went in and developed afterwards, you'd want to compensate for the height and scale of the tower by setting back away from that tower, which would then further limit the development potential of the site. So these additional constraints would reduce the site's development potential as a mixed-use village center, which is really the intent of that zone. So the conclusion is that the proposal does not meet all of the criteria. Some of the criteria have been met, but there's 3 criteria that are at issue. Staff recommends the application be denied. And the next steps would be, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them to the extent possible. We'll open the public hearing and then ask for a tentative decision with the basis for that decision and findings. You could approve, deny, or approve with conditions, but that we come back and adopt findings and the decision on September 10th.
Okay, any questions, Melissa? Yeah, right?
Melissa, when you talk about, when the development code talks about anticipated and development potential, what kind of a time frame are you talking here? I mean, the mixed-use commercial zone has been in existence there for how long? I mean, are we talking like 50 years, maybe something might come that would be...
I think we'd hope for something definitely sooner than that. I think it
Understood.
was rezoned
That's what I'm
around
trying to-
2005.
We're locking out some potential development now for something that may come down the road.
Yeah, and I think it's centered around, okay, we have the zoning district, it's mixed-use commercial zone, it's a village center zone, it's intended for a certain type of uses, but by placing this particular use of this height and scale, which is really more of an industrial character, not finding that it's really compatible with what's there existing, what's intended for the area, and what we'd hope this to develop, as.
Melissa, do we have a map or a good sense of where other cell towers are located in town, and do we have any cell towers located in similar kinds of situations?
That's a good question. Actually, up on 53rd, there's a very large tower. In your packet, the applicant had provided a good summary of a variety of towers in the area and the height and like that. After reviewing that and also comparing it on the web with the FCC site, because you have to register towers, I compared that and found the information to be accurate, but also identified the zoning districts. And all of those towers were either outside of the city, in a light industrial zone. There was one that was a community commercial zone, and one that was HD historic district zone, downtown historic zone, but that was the antenna on the county courthouse. So basically most of the towers have been in industrial areas or outside of the city in the Albany area.
And did you ever look to see how many of those towers were actually placed before we did our review standards, our code for communication facilities? Because we established that, I remember when we did a few years back, or probably more than 10 years ago.
Yeah, I didn't drill down that deep in terms of comparing the date that were established. I do have the information here, so if it's a burning issue, we can try to look that up for you during the testimony.
All right, Bessie, you have a question?
Yeah, Melissa, I missed it. How far away from the bowling alley did you say it was going to be? I couldn't tell on the map.
Approximately 40 feet. The base of the tower, I believe, would be about 35 feet away, the actual pole, but the antennas actually, let's see, the antennas would go out further. The antennas may be around 35 feet away, and the base would be about 40, 44 feet
So it's
away.
40 feet from the property line of the bowling alley. Is that correct, or is it 40 feet from the bowling alley? I mean,
Yeah, the
it'd have to
bowling-
be from the property line, I would think.
Yeah, I believe we're measuring from the property
Okay.
line, and the building is about 10 feet away from the property line. Is
Okay.
my recollection.
And then just one quick question is, to get into this property,
Be from 53rd.
and there's
Avenue.
already, they're gonna build a road or
Yes, a driveway and access
get the
from 53rd.
easement? Okay, all right, thank you.
Bill, and then Dick?
Jim, can I reference a map that's in the packet?
Sure.
In asking a question? So I'm looking at page 113 of the packet, which appears to be a potential development plan. Looks like it was submitted by Schneider Homes. Do you have that drawing?
Yes, sir.
So I'm curious as to how the placement of the tower would impact future development, particularly when you were discussing setbacks and the type of development that might go in that area. You know, my first thought was a lot of this could not be built according to the developer's own drawing.
Yes, my understanding is that this was a concept plan by the current owner for residential development, and so this was an idea of where the tower would be located in relation to that concept plan, and that basically this does illustrate the point I was making, is that you would want to set back any future development away from that tower if it was built, which would further limit how much of that area you could develop and limit really the viability of that developing as a mixed-use village center. So the way it's placed on, let's say, page 114, you know, the development would have to have some type of setback around that.
Is that equal to the height of the tower, or do you know what that setback would be?
Well, we would go through a site plan review if there was any development of this nature likely, at least, and possibly it would involve a public hearing with the Planning Commission. We have a requirement that a tower must be set back from a public way at least as much as the height of the tower. So it would have to be a minimum of 120 feet away from 53rd Avenue. There is not a specific setback away from development, existing development. Our code just has criteria relating to a public way. But this diagram, particularly on 114, it would not necessarily be practical that it would be located right there in front of the houses.
Wouldn't be allowed.
But would the roadways in this development, and I understand it's conceptual only, so it's all hypothetical, but would the roadways be considered public ways?
Well, on this plan, actually, I anticipate that this would be a private driveway or private road as opposed to a public way. I was bringing up the setback from public way just to give an example of in relation to that we do have that standard, but we don't have, you know, a specific standard of, you know, future development has to be so many feet away from this. But it would have to meet at a minimum the, you know, site plan review criteria. And so we'd evaluate that at that time.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Dick, and then Ray?
Yeah, I was going to ask essentially the same question as to how many units of either business or residential development the tower would negate. And I guess you pretty well answered that the tower can't fall on a public right-of-way. Now, is that 53rd Street, or is that the little driveways inside this development here, which
Right.
I find hard to
you know, that standard would not necessarily apply after the fact. When you're siting a tower, you have to meet that standard. But that is only the public streets, public way.
Oh, okay. Well, as for this development, aren't the streets in there going to be public Public
This
right-of-way?
particular concept plan, it's likely to be private driveway or private road.
Okay.
Just looking at this, but this is just a concept plan. But certainly, it could not be placed as illustrated in this.
So the
It would,
developers,
development would have to be set back away from that and to try to mitigate for the size and scale of that, you definitely want to be setting back your development away from it with some type of a buffer.
so the developer is giving up a significant amount of his property to have this tower here.
Yes, I would believe so.
Okay, Ray?
Just from what Dick was saying there, these conceptual plans from back in the day from the property owner, he's already deemed those to be moot because he's saying, I want to lease the property now for this tower. So these are just basically, you can make paper airplanes out of them at this point,
Yeah, these are submitted by the applicant and
the property
so-
owner.
Yeah, the applicant and property owner.
Right. So basically, they're just fun drawings on a piece of paper, but he's already walking away from that, saying, I want to lease this land to Verizon to put the tower on.
Definitely, the property owner is willing to lease the land and open to that option.
I'm a little confused here. So this conceptual plan here, was this, is this currently with this application? Or
No.
this was dated back?
No, this was just submitted by the applicant, and I think, in terms of how they would like you to see this, I think it'd be good to hear from them.
Okay, we'll ask him that. Okay, Rich? Mm-hmm.
I think Bill and Dick's question is a salient one. If you're going to set back from the tower, and we don't know how far that would be because it would go through a program, is 40 feet too far, or would it be further than that? And if it's further than 40 feet, it's already encroaching on the guy next door. I mean, is there any way of us knowing what that should be?
Do you have something to add, Bob, in
Well-
terms of, we don't have a specific standard for that, but if.
Right, I
perhaps
think
you can
that
add
there isn't a specific requirement that says, that would say, a building has to be X number of feet from a cell tower such as the one proposed. The point that I think Melissa is making, which is illustrated by this conceptual plan, and again, this wasn't a conceptual plan that staff put in, it was one that the applicant submitted, is that it shows, practically speaking, what this would look like. If you were to develop that site, it would have a cell tower of that size and scale so close to buildings that it would seem to be that, just practically speaking, those buildings would likely be set back from that tower some distance, whatever distance I think the developer would think would be appropriate so they could sell the lots to attract residents or businesses into whatever buildings might be there. In terms of the idea of the property owner sort of saying, well, I'm just gonna, this is what I want to do, I want to put a cell tower on it, and then making that decision now, I think that's a good point. The other way of looking at that is that the vision of the community as expressed through the development code was for this parcel to be developed with a mix of retail and residential uses with a neighborhood center, as a neighborhood scale, neighborhood center area. And I think the point is with having a cell tower in that location, it appears to compromise the ability to achieve that that vision that's contemplated in the development code for how that site should be developed. And I think it's that issue of compatibility that we're addressing in relationship to criteria 1 and 2 of the conditional use permit.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, okay. Thank you, Melissa. All right, if anyone wishes to enter an exhibit into the record as part of your testimony, please briefly describe the exhibit and then present it to the clerk. And so, would the applicant please like to come forward, and then you'll need to state your name, and if you could spell your last name and your address, and make any comments you may have for the city council.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. My name is Mike Connors, and I'm with the law firm Hathaway Kobach Connors. Address is 520 Southwest Yamhill Street, Suite 235, Portland, Oregon 97204. I'm here on behalf of the applicant, Verizon Wireless. With me as well is Conrad Heil with BlackRock. He's the consultant that's been working, doing a lot of the groundwork, and was actually at the Planning Commission proceedings. I think staff did a good job of explaining what the proposal is, but I want to give you a little bit more background before I start addressing the criteria so that you understand sort of how we arrived at this particular site, this particular proposal. So the purpose for this site is to fill a coverage gap which currently exists in the city of Albany, and in particular in the area south of Albany, Albany Junction City Highway, and the surrounding rural area. Currently, the coverage there is poor to non-existent. And so when Verizon Wireless determines we got a coverage gap that we now need to fill, the first thing they do is determine what's the area of properties that we can consider for a new facility. And they create what's called a search ring, which in this case is a quarter-mile circle area. And then once they identify that, and that's through our RF engineers, we go through the process of, in this case, looking at your code in terms of the hierarchy. First hierarchy, is there an existing structure, tower out there that we could site our facility? And we determine that there aren't any. There's none in the search ring. The closest one is a tower, they call it the Bicoastal Willamette Valley Tower, which is less than a mile from this site. It's 275 feet tall. But the problem is that it will create both conflicts with our existing towers in the area, as well as conflicts with the radio type facilities on that particular tower. So we ruled that out. And understand that the best case scenario that my client can find is to have an existing tower so that they don't have to go through a process like this and really have to make an application. But unfortunately, nothing was available. Then we started looking through the hierarchy of different zones. Industrial, there is no industrial zoning in the particular search area that we looked in. Then we look at some of the higher end commercial, and those include regional commercial, and there's a community commercial property. We approached both those property owners and inquired about their willingness to lease property to us, and in both cases they indicated they were unwilling to do so. And we submitted a letter and emails into the record to demonstrate that we attempted this. So it really left the subject site that we have before you as the only viable site, viable from the standpoint that it's in a search ring, it's in a zone that specifically allows for towers of this height, and we had a willing property owner who's willing to lease space for our facility. And there's no evidence. I should mention too that in the record we have a pretty extensive alternative sites analysis, and it's an analysis that basically in much greater detail walks you through what I just walked you through so that you can understand and substantiates that we went through these various steps and why we're unable to find a different site. And there's no evidence in the record to the contrary. There's no evidence of another site that anybody has identified that is within the search ring, can serve our coverage needs, and we have a willing property owner who's willing to lease space. So really, this is it. This is the only site that we have. As you saw, hopefully, from the aerial there, there's the property itself is vacant. And then surrounding it on many sides are a lot of open spaces. If you go to the north and west, it's vacant property. To the south, it's vacant open space. And then you get further out, you do get into some development. But surrounding the property, for the most part, except to the east, there is very little existing development that's there. And Also, if you look at some of the new material that was just provided to you tonight, where we went out and took some photographs to show you, there are 80-foot utility poles with lines in between each pole that line down 53rd Avenue as well as Highway 99. I'm sure you're probably familiar with this because this is your community, but it's just something that, one of those things that sometimes we look past because we're so accustomed to seeing it, to understand that you do have these tall structures existing in the area. We did a number of things to try and be sensitive to the impacts of this use. We understand, my client understands that this is not everybody's favorite kind of development, but it's an important development. It's important that we have. And so what we try to do is try to mitigate to the greatest extent possible so that we can minimize the impacts and make sure that we can comply to the greatest extent possible with your code. And so a couple of those things that we did is, first of all, although your code does not impose a height limit on telecommunication facilities, it says in this zone, if it's greater than 50 feet, you have to go through conditional use permit, but there's no height limit. We limited our proposal to the minimum height necessary that we need to meet our coverage objectives, which is 120 feet. We also proposed a monopole design, which is that sleek-looking tower as opposed to the lattice, because that's the preferred design in your code. We located it behind the bowling alley in part to try to minimize some of those visual impacts because you already have a structure there. Obviously, the structure is not as tall as our structure, but you at least have some mitigation that's there. And the property itself, as I indicated, there's a lot of open space around it, so that sort of operates as a buffer to the surrounding properties. We had a neighborhood meeting where we had some comments from a couple of individuals that we took into account, a noise study, an emission study, things that we weren't required to do. And then we privately met with the owner of the bowling alley, Mr. Nyquist, and talked to him about his concerns. And one of the things that we did is we moved the tower slightly to the west to accommodate an issue that he raised. And so we really did try to do the best that we could to mitigate it. In fact, if you look at the staff report indicates that there's really nothing further we can do to mitigate. We've mitigated to the maximum extent possible in order to meet our coverage objective. So at the Planning Commission level, at that level, staff supported our proposal. They went through the analysis and concluded that we comply with all the criteria, and they recommended approval of the proposal. There were two people that testified at the hearing in opposition, one of which was Mr. Nyquist. And that's pretty significant because normally the notice area is a 300-foot notice area, but city staff wanted to expand it to a 1,000-foot area. So we had two property owners that showed up. It's clear if you look at the Planning Commission decision that we comply with all of the objective criteria or development standards. We meet the setbacks, we meet the height requirements, we meet landscaping, screening, all of it. There's no dispute, nobody has argued that there's a development standard that we don't meet. Ultimately, what the Planning Commission determined is that we don't satisfy these three criteria that staff identified in the staff report, but those three criteria all come down to one issue, and that's the height of the tower. Planning Commission concluded that the height was too great, and as a result of that, for slightly varying reasons, determined that it doesn't satisfy those three criteria, but it all really comes down to the height. And so, what is our appeal based upon? Our appeal is based upon the belief that the Planning Commission misinterpreted and misapplied the code standards, even the three particular standards. And the first reason for that is the main impetus behind the Planning Commission's decision, and that is the height. Effectively, what the Planning Commission did is it imposed an artificial height restriction on this particular property, and quite frankly in this zone, and even in a broader case, which I'll explain later, that doesn't exist in the code. So in this zone, your code expressly allows telecommunication facilities, outright uses, if they're under 50 feet. But if they're greater than 50 feet, then you go through a conditional use permit. But there is no height restriction to anything greater than 50 feet. So the code contemplates a facility greater than 50 feet, which is the building height restriction that the Planning Commission relies on heavily. If you look at the telecommunications facility provisions in 8.500, there is no height restriction in those either. And so you have this situation where the Planning Commission is effectively interpreting your code to say, if there are existing uses in the surrounding area, then you're really limited to that particular height. Now, they talk about the fact that our tower is significantly greater than the adjacent use, which is 20 feet, greater than the maximum building height limitation. Well, that's not an interpretation supported under the code, because that assumes that you dictate the height based on the surrounding uses or based on the maximum building height. But that's not what the code requires for telecommunication facilities. And the obvious reason for that is, unlike a building, telecommunication facility by its nature requires more height than you're going to get with a building. You know, the technology is line of sight, so you have to be able to get above the structures and trees and be able to have the different towers communicating with one another, and that's what the code recognizes. And again, you have a situation here where the Planning Commission is making that determination, notwithstanding the fact that we're proposing the minimum height necessary that we need. So we're not trying to get greedy, we're not going above and beyond. We're at the minimum height necessary. And I think that what the Planning Commission has done is really departed from how the city's code has been applied in the past. And that's based in part upon, if you look at the telecommunication facilities in the surrounding area, which is another handout that we provided, which is actually in the City Council packet, you'll see that there are numerous towers that are within a less than 1 mile to 4 mile area of our tower that are taller, and in some cases significantly taller. The one that's less than a mile is 275 feet. And that same rationale, although it's being applied in this particular zone, really can be applied in any of the zones. In fact, I don't think the Planning Commission understood how broadly its interpretation could be applied. What do I mean by that? Well, if you look at your code and determine what zones allow for these telecommunication facilities that are greater than 50 feet, you will find that most or a large number of them require a conditional use permit for this. The community commercial, the transit district, the industrial park, the mixed use, those all require conditional use permits. If you adopt the Planning Commission's interpretation, that interpretation will apply directly to any other proposal for this kind of facility in any of those zones, because it triggers the same conditional use criteria, and it would be the same argument that would be made. If you don't have 100, 150-foot buildings in the surrounding area, it's not compatible. But it goes even further than that, because there are some zones that allow towers greater than 50 feet through a site plan process. Well, the site plan process has very similar criteria. If you look at the site plan criteria, which is in section 2.450, and particularly subsection 4 of that, it requires that an applicant show that the design and operating characteristics of the development are reasonably compatible with surrounding development and land uses. That's very similar language to what you have in your conditional use criteria. So all those zones where site plan review, which is regional commercial, light industrial, all of those, somebody can point to the same criteria and say, that's the same thing you said on this site. We want the same interpretation. And then you can take it even further, because there's one zone, and only one zone, that allows a facility like this greater than 50 feet as an outright permitted use, and that's heavy industrial. Well, there aren't any heavy industrial zones that currently exist in the city. And even if there are, you also have this criteria that applies to telecommunications facilities, which is an 8.500, subsection 6, one of the same subsections that the Planning Commission adopted, that they found we don't comply with because of the height of the tower in comparison to the surrounding uses and the building height limitation. So I don't believe that the Planning Commission intended its interpretation to operate that way, but it will. Because if you adopt it as part of this decision, then effectively you're going to allow any other application that comes down the road having to explain why it doesn't apply there. And for that reason, we think that the Planning Commission erred in effectively imposing an artificial height restriction that doesn't exist in your code, in fact is inconsistent with your code and the purpose of the code. The next issue, which there were some questions about, is the impact on the future development. I think the best evidence to understand, let me back up. The issue that was raised about impact on future development, I want to make sure you understand, it applies to this specific site where we're proposing this facility. It's the impact on the future development on the same site that we are leasing and proposing to site this facility. Well, what's the best evidence of potential impact and whether that's a problem or not? Probably the best evidence is to ask the property owner. And in this case, we're not dealing with a property owner who doesn't understand development, and it may be something that they're in turn selling to somebody out. This property is owned by Snyder Homes. They're a developer. They understand what the development potential is for a property. And the purpose for submitting the concept plan, which now, realize in hindsight, I think has created some confusion, was not to say, here's the plan and here's exactly how it's going to be, because that is a concept plan. It hasn't been submitted. It hasn't gone through a review process. The purpose for submitting that was to substantiate the fact that this property owner, this developer, has thought through how this property would be developed. Is it going to be developed exactly how it's in that concept plan? I don't know, but I don't think anybody can say that it is. I don't think the property owner is even saying that. But it shows that they've thought about how they could develop the property. And the property owner determined that this property can be developed to its full extent without the tower impacting that potential. There's some revenue that you get from some of these lease sites from telecommunication companies, but let me tell you, they don't replace the kind of value you're going to get if you're going to have additional housing units or commercial or retail. Property owner's not going to jeopardize that for a lease revenue on one of these sites. And just to make sure, we asked the property owner to reiterate his comfort level with this, because we worked with him. We talked about how are you going to develop this property, where should we put this site so that it's going to minimize the impacts on it. And this was a site that we collaboratively came to. There's a recent letter that we put in, submitted into the record August 13th, where he's reiterating the fact that this will not impact the future development of my property. And so if you look at that, I think that that's the best evidence. I don't think that there's any other evidence that's been submitted to show that if you cite this here, somehow you're not going to be able to impact it. The only issue that's been raised is with respect to whether there would be a desire to have some setback or buffer. That's not a requirement. I want to be clear on that. There is a requirement that you have a setback from a public way, and we satisfy that, and that's not in dispute. But there is no setback requirement with respect to one of these facilities next to a structure. And if you look through some of the photos that we provided of the other utilities, towers in the area, you'll see that some of them are right next to buildings. In fact, as I was driving down I-5 to the hearing tonight, I was looking not, in this city, but in other areas along the freeway with these towers right up next to it. That is not unusual. To the extent that it is an issue that, the developer is going to put it, it's going to be from a marketing standpoint. The developer, the property owner in this case, is going to make that determination. But there's nothing in the code that will require that by siting the tower here that somehow you're taking out this great swath of area and it's undevelopable. That's just not the case. And there's no evidence that anybody has submitted to say, here's why you're not going to be able to develop this property. Again, the best evidence we have is the property owner is a developer. He's worked with us. that company is comfortable with the site and the fact that it's not going to impact the future development. Real quickly, I want to hit on a third issue, which is this issue of co-location. And the point that because co-location is going to be provided, it's going to increase the bulk. Well, that's a specific mandatory requirement in your code. Your code requires that carriers provide or allow for co-location on new towers. And actually, I think that's a good policy because it prevents there being another facility that would be sited in close proximity. But that's not a basis you can use to deny our application, because that's something that's a mandatory requirement in your code, and we're just complying with it. So on that basis, we don't think that that's a legitimate basis to, for denial of the application. We also feel that the Planning Commission really discounted the mitigation that we offered. In conditional use, yes, it does add some additional discretionary criteria, but the purpose of it is to give the city additional tools to make sure that you can force an applicant to mitigate to the maximum extent possible for a use that's allowed, recognized in the zone. And we've done that. And again, I point that to the fact that in your staff report, the staff acknowledges there's really nothing else we could do to mitigate this. We've done the maximum extent possible. And I think that the Planning Commission just sort of overlooked that or felt that that was not relevant when, in our estimation, that is very relevant under this criteria, that you have an applicant who's mitigating to the maximum extent possible. And lastly, you have to consider what the result of adopting the Planning Commission's decision is going to be. And the result is going to be that we're not going to be able to provide coverage in this particular area of your city. And I want to reiterate that we're not just talking about coverage from, the public, private users, people on their phone and all that. It includes 911. And we have determined that we've got poor to non-existent coverage in this area because this is the only viable site and because we've mitigated it to the maximum extent possible. If you don't approve this, we don't have any other options. And so we're not going to be able to satisfy that coverage gap. And I think that should be a concern of yours from a practical standpoint for the reasons that I talked about, is increasing use of wireless devices, the need to make sure 911 service is reliable, and just the need to make sure that you have a mature broadband infrastructure and you're providing those services for the community. But there's also a legal issue as well, and the legal issue is that there's a federal law, Federal Telecommunications Act, and the Federal Telecommunications Act requires that local governments not impose regulations that, and I'll quote, prohibit or have the effect of prohibiting the provisions of personal wireless service. I think that the Planning Commission's interpretation and application of the code in this case would have the effect of prohibiting personal wireless service because it, in effect, prevents us from being able to provide this fill this coverage gap. But as I indicated earlier, it has broader implications that go beyond just this site and just this zone and would set a precedent for others to be able to come in and say they can't satisfy this because that particular facility is too tall. So in closing, I appreciate your patience in going through these items. Just want to say again, we understand that these are not the most popular kinds of developments. We understand that they have impacts, and we take seriously and really strive to try to minimize those impacts, and we've done that in this case. But there's a need for this facility, and the only way that we're going to be able to get that need met is if you interpret your code the way that it was written and apply it in a way that is more consistent with its intent and approve our application. I think that's the most consistent reading of your code. As I indicated, there's no other dispute with regard to any of the other criteria that we meet, and so therefore we ask that you reverse the Planning Commission and approve our application. And with that, if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Okay. Yeah, Reg, and then Floyd.
What distance does this cell cover?
Well, there's some coverage maps that we have in the record, that show
Well, it's
you.
further than a quarter of a mile. I mean,
Yes, it's further
Yeah.
than a quarter of a mile, yes.
like past Highway 34.
I don't know the specific area, but like I said, let me see if I can find those.
My point here being, I remember when cell service first came here, there was one cell tower, and it was on the top of Knox Butte, and it covered everything.
Yeah.
It was a function of, you had a very limited number of people who could be on that cell, because of that point, 832 people at any one given time. But, so when you say it's a quarter of a mile, that was picked because that is the most efficient?
Yeah, sorry, it took me a while to get through. If you look, there's pages 63 through 67 that provide what we call these propagation maps. And what they show you is, here's where the existing conditions are, here's where the other facilities or towers in our network are located and where they're serving, and here's where what service this particular tower will provide. The quarter-mile area that I talked about is not necessarily the area of service that we're trying to cover. It's the area of property that our RF, radio frequency engineers, have determined this
The
tower
center
needs
of
to be
the
sited
place.
in order to sync with the other towers. That's right.
Secondly, there is heavy industrial property at Ormet or at ATI, and we're talking about, what, a mile?
On page 25. Shows
In-
HI zones.
Yeah.
I
It is heavy
apologize.
industrial,
I
and,
had
yeah.
I had thought that there was a statement in the earlier record talking about there no longer being any heavy industrial. It could be that it
But
was
could
heavy
be that
commercial.
they're not any open in that area.
No, I was
for
talking about the
sale.
zoning.
Yeah.
But just
There's
to
zoning.
understand on that point.
They did submit a letter that they were not interested in leasing at ATI. It's in the record.
Oh, okay. So there is a letter in the record
There is,
that
and
is
it's,
particular.
the back end of that property is pretty open.
Correct.
Further, I mean, there's a reason that we have a setback from any public street. And I would think, I don't know, I didn't write it, but I would think it is for, so if this thing comes tumbling down through some being hit by lightning or, terrorism or whatever it is, that it's not going to hit a vehicle on the street. I guess I point out, 40 feet away is a little closer than 120 feet. I'm not understanding why, you say you've mitigated all you can for that particular spot, probably. But, I mean, there's the others, there may be restrictions from the other side of the property, or, did you consider that, or did the property owner say they couldn't do it, or?
No, what we did is we sat down with the property owner to figure out where was the best location to minimize impact on future development of the property, and also where was the best location in terms of mitigating impacts. So between the combination of those two, that's where the particular site was located. Now, there was a slight adjustment that was made based on conversations that our consultants had with Mr. Nyquist. But the reason that it was located from a mitigation standpoint in close proximity to the bowling alley is because the bowling alley, the building itself, provides some visual mitigation. You've got a structure existing there, so if you put a structure that's taller than it, it's going to have less of a visual impact. And so that was the reason that it was chosen. I'm not sure that the requirement that there be a setback from the public way is due to safety, because there's not instances of these towers falling over on a regular basis. I mean, these are highly engineered facilities, and in some regards, they're probably more structurally sound than some structures that we have out there.
I would hope so.
Yeah, and so I don't think it is based on that. I don't think it's a safety-related issue. I just think it's based on the concept of it provides some sort of a buffer from the public way, and they make it commensurate with the height of the facility.
I guess your your engineers picking that particular spot being in the center of the total, I mean, if that spot could move down a mile one direction to a radio tower that's sitting there, but would be interfered, so you can't use that.
Correct.
I would think it would be able to be moved a mile another direction.
Well, it would if we could find, well, first of all, understand we got a search area, so we have to be within the search area. Secondly, we have to.
That you imposed. That your own people imposed, because that's where they say that's going to give you the best bang for the buck.
No. It's where the tower needs to be from a technical standpoint. In other words, we have existing towers that are out there. To meet this coverage need, there needs to be coordination between those towers. The RF engineer identifies the search area based on what they determine is necessary.
But that is your determining where the best spot is. It's your choice, is what I'm saying, to be efficient.
Well, it is our determination, but it's not based on just a desire or a preference. It's based on RF engineering and a technical analysis that goes into that. And, and
what I said, yes.
What's that?
Yeah, they picked the spot because it's the most efficient. Yeah. Anyway, that takes care of my questions.
Okay, all right, Floyd?
Yeah, just a couple points of clarification. I think you just covered one. The HI zones that are in the city in the immediate area are shown on page 25 of the exhibits. And then you referenced the 275-foot tower. It's shown on page 83. And note that's outside the city limits. That's not in the city.
Sure.
So our standards were not applied to that. And I believe that tower was pre-existing the annexation of the area that's in the city. So our standards never applied to that tower.
Well, and I didn't mean to suggest that it went through some specific city process. I think the point is that there are a lot of taller towers in the surrounding area. And so that sort of is really just a basis to understand that, this isn't a unique situation of us proposing a tower of this height.
I thought I was hearing you make the comparison that we had previously approved a 275-foot tower, so now.
If I did, I didn't mean to do that.
Tower.
Yeah, no, I didn't mean to do that.
Why wouldn't two towers separated in this target area provide similar coverage instead of having one 120-foot tower?
Because because it all works based on line of sight. So you have to get the tower up at a point where it is in a line of sight, able to communicate with the other towers as messages are being relayed. So if you have two shorter towers, neither one of them are going to function in that way. And so the idea here is to do the one tower. The other thing to consider, although from a technical standpoint I don't think that works, is part of your policy, in your code, is to limit the number of these towers. So I understand, yeah, that's right, I understand the height is something that people don't like, but then if you're trading that off with more facilities, in some regards that could be greater impact and not necessarily consistent with.
I guess I'm not understanding your position, and I would like to, about the line of sight from a 120-foot tower communicating with another tower that Verizon owns.
Mm-hmm.
The valley here is relatively flat. Are your other towers 120 feet?
Do you know the height of the other towers?
Yeah, Verizon has one on, I think it's Three Rivers, I'm not sure, on the kind of the east side of town. And I think that's 140, 150, so it's similar in that range. There's going to be some variation for topography, et cetera.
But they're similar in height. And understand that when we propose a height, we understand that the taller the tower it's going to be, the more potential controversy it's going to create. There's really no benefit for us to try to get an even taller tower because that's not necessarily going to provide us greater coverage. The way we look at this particular facility is we want it to be the minimum height necessary in order for it be able to function with the other existing towers in the network. And that's what we determined that it is. There wouldn't really be any benefit if we could get away with a 70-foot tower saying, let's go for 120 feet. Because we don't get any extra benefit out of that, and we understand that the taller the tower, the more potential pushback that we're going to get. So if you try to look at it that way, I mean, in addition to the fact that we do have, technical evidence in the record to support all of these statements, and there's really no evidence to the contrary, but just from a practical standpoint, thinking about it, there really wouldn't be any benefit for us to try to get more height than was really necessary.
So the tower serves two purposes. It communicates from the individual user cell.
Correct.
And it relays it on to the subsequent towers.
Correct.
So it's not just a line of sight to the other towers, but it's also how do you communicate within a geographic area with those individual cell phones.
Correct, but the main thing for the height and location is communication with other towers in the immediate surrounding area.
Okay, thank you.
Bill, did you have a question?
So there was some discussion earlier on this, the zoning areas, and it was specifically the heavy industrial. So I'm looking at the map on page 25, and then looking at the letter from ATI on 72, page 72, where they're not interested in participating. Are there other property owners in that heavy industrial area that you contacted, or do you know if ATI owns all that property?
Well, understand that, and I apologize, I created some confusion talking about heavy industrial. I realize now it's heavy commercial. That is what was in the staff report, that there wasn't any zoning. So I just wanted to clear up on that. I misspoke there. But understand, first of all, that is outside of the search ring that we need. So the search ring defines where are the viable sites where we could site this particular tower to meet it. And so because the heavy industrial is outside of that search ring, it's not a site that's going to work. It's not a site that's going to be able to serve this coverage gap for this particular area.
Well, again, it kind of gets back to what Rich says. I understand that's your optimum site. But we'll leave it at that. But then,
well, no. Can I just address
Sure.
that? I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I want to again. I want to make another point that I was making to Councilor Collins. Understand when you say it's not our preferred site. If we had a heavy industrial site, it would be an outright permitted use.
Right.
We wouldn't have to go through a complicated application process, planning commission, go to the city council. There wouldn't be the kind of notice that goes out to the surrounding area. If we could find a heavy industrial site that would work, my client would jump at it. So I understand some skepticism about the information we're providing. But if you look at it through that lens, this is not an optimal site, because this is a site that required us to go through a conditional use permit, which has risks associated with it, is costly, and takes time. And so that, I think, is one way of trying to understand that our information is credible, that if we could find one of those sites, that would be the optimum site. But unfortunately, our search ring, limits the sites that we have. We looked in those sites. Some of the zones don't allow it. Property owners, other property owners in some of the, more dense commercial type areas, they're not interested in leasing it, and so we're sort of stuck.
and that kind of brings me to the next question. On page 68, there's several property owners that are not interested in entering into a lease agreement. Can you shed a little light on what the issues are?
Just property owners, some property owners are not interested in leasing space for these kind of facilities. I don't know all of the specific details of what the reasons were, and probably in some cases they didn't provide us much reason. But we'll contact a property owner, explain who we are, explain what we're proposing to do, and ask them if they would be interested in sitting down and discussing a possible lease of a particular site. And in all these cases, what this report is identifying is these are the property owners that indicated they had no interest. And some of them, we asked for letters and emails to substantiate that, but I understand not everyone will do that. I mean, if you're Verizon Wireless and just approaching somebody sort of as a cold call and saying, hey, we're interested in doing that, some people are just going to say, I don't want to deal with you. No, the answer is no, and that's what I'll leave it at. But in some cases, for this very reason, we try to ask, can you provide us some documentation just to show that we went through the effort, and that's what the letter and the email are for.
So with that, do you ever, because I noticed everything was for leasing property, why don't you just try to pursue and purchase property?
It's just not something that anybody in the industry does, to actually acquire property for one of these facilities. I'm not aware of one, and, it's not just this particular client that I've worked with. I've had exposure with other carriers as well. And so it's purely on a lease basis.
Yeah, because I was going to say, if you found the properly zoned property that worked within your range, then yeah, if you had purchased it, you wouldn't have to go through, trying to come up with a property owner wanting to lease. But it was just another.
I think it's cost prohibitive in one sense, because if you're purchasing a property, you're only using it for a facility, then, it's significantly more expensive than it is to lease.
Yeah.
And if I could, just to clarify, so I'm sure we're understanding in that regard. So I'm assuming then that all of the cell phone providers basically have a schedule that they use, what their lease rates are going to be, and that those are the lease rates that are offered then to property owners when you're trying to get approval?
Correct.
All right. And these property owners you checked with weren't willing to lease at the rate you were proposing?
No, I don't think they were willing to lease, period.
Do you know that?
I don't know that for a fact, but Conrad, do you know whether there's anybody who...
In some cases, I know, in some cases, it's future development that some property owners aren't willing because of future development potential. Some have plans to put their property up for sale, and they're going through a lease negotiation and maybe encumber a sale. So it varies case by case. I don't know.
But isn't it largely a question of price?
No, I don't think so. I mean,
so no matter how much you offer, they won't sell?
No. Well, I mean, there's always a limit to what we're able to offer. But just think about it from your perspective. Right. If somebody did come and ask to put this on your property, there might be a number of people that would say, I don't care how much you would offer me. I don't want one of these facilities on my property. And again, understand that there are ranges in terms of the lease rates. I mean, it's not as if we go in and say, lowball, this is what we're going to be willing to pay, and if they won't accept that, say, well, we'll go somewhere else. Because again, if there's a property where there's an easier process, we're going to save more money by going through the easier process than we are on, a slightly reduced
and please don't misunderstand, I don't mean to express any advocacy for or against your proposal.
Yeah.
You raised the question whether or not there would be a federal law that would be violated if the city essentially precluded you from being able to locate. And it sounds as if, to some degree, the financial constraints you operate under may preclude you because you're not offering to buy the property, you're only offering to lease it, and there is an amount that doesn't make economic sense to your company. So it's not impossibility by city regulation, rather it is a fiscal constraint that is an internal company decision, which is your own business.
Well, I don't think that's how the act has been interpreted by the courts. I understand your point. And it's very rare that there's a situation when a property owner were unable to lease a site from them purely based on rent. I don't know for a fact, because I wasn't the one that contacted them, but that would be unusual, and usually it'd be some sort of a indication. I don't see it, so I'm assuming that that's not the case. But I don't think that a requirement that a carrier purchase the property is necessarily, exempt from that act. And again, raise it because it's an issue. That's not what we want the focus of this to be. I mean, we feel you don't even need to go to determining whether there's an issue under this federal statute, because we think under your code, this meets the code, and that's where the focus should be.
Any other questions? Yeah, Reg?
You mentioned a couple of times that you can understand why someone would not want to have a cell tower on their property.
Correct.
Do you understand why someone would not want to have a cell tower next to their property?
Yes.
Is there a difference?
Well, I mean, I guess they're similar, but this is what I do for a living, is land use. And I can tell you that it's not just cell towers that cause people on neighboring properties to say, I don't want that. Almost every application of anything of any significance, you're going to get somebody out there and they're going to say, we don't want this here. That's why you have the code. If you satisfy the code, then I think it's set up so that you can encourage and foster smart kind of development. And along the way, there are going to be some people who would prefer not to have development next to them. That's kind of how I look at this.
I think you're correct. But I think that is also why we have secondary rules that say it kind of has to fit. Because if you look at the projections, they weren't pictures, they were the areas with the cell tower in place, and I presume that staff did that so it's all to scale. It looks like the center smokestack of, here's everything down here and that thing is way up there. I think that's also a legitimate thought process. Do I want that driving past as I'm, your point with 77-foot tall power poles, we got power poles everywhere. And it's kind of something we're all used to. And, if we had cell towers everywhere, and we have them a lot of places, we would be used to that. But as I see this one, it's, the base is here and the rest of it is way up there.
Yeah.
I understand why people would find that onerous.
And so do I. I understand why people would have concerns or raise objections. But going back to just like with the utility poles, granted, you're right, now you can look at it and it sort of blends in because you're so accustomed to seeing it. But if today you were considering providing these utilities, building out your infrastructure, you would be dealing with the same problems. But that's part of the process. Part of the process is that, especially utility type uses, which is really what this is. Utility uses are uses that people are, some of the least favorite, but they're very important because you've got to build out your infrastructure. And here, you've got a wireless broadband infrastructure that you need to make sure that the city builds out as well. So, are there going to be some impacts? Yes. We're not here to say that, hey, there's no impacts, nobody has any right to be objectionable. But if you look at the criteria, I think we satisfy that criteria. Because really the only issue, the main issue that's been raised has to do with height. And if you intended to limit the height to 50 feet, which is, the height of surrounding structures or the maximum height for buildings in the area, then that would be in the code, and that would be the code provision that you would adopt. But you haven't.
In fact, there is a provision that says it has to fit.
Yeah.
And that having to fit is, I agree, a nebulous thing. It's not like I've been on the, gee, I want to have that happen all the time, because sometimes it works against what I want. But I recognize that it's there.
Yeah.
It is part of the code.
Yes.
It's not like it's, because it doesn't say 112 feet or, it is just something that judgment is used on.
It is, and just understand that if you look at all the other facilities in the surrounding area, which are as tall or taller than ours, these by nature are going to be much taller than any building, and they're going to be taller than even the maximum building height. So if you interpret the code that way, like I said earlier, that can be applied in just about every zone, and what it's going to mean is that none of these facilities are going to meet that criteria, and we're just saying that that's not what we think you intended when you adopted the code and the standards that you did.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I want to make sure I understand the quarter-mile search ring. That is where your engineers have determined it's optimal to meet your service area requirements.
That's where they determine the tower needs to be sited in order to meet our objectives.
But yet you went to the light industrial properties to the north and asked Mr. Epping and others whether they were considered leasing that's outside the search ring?
There was some effort on the immediate outskirts of the search ring to be able to contact some of those property owners, in particular because it was industrially zoned.
Well, I would note that we almost lose it on the map, but just across the railroad tracks on the east side, there's heavy industrial land that's already in the city and zoned. It is outside the search ring by another eighth of a mile.
It's like I said, trust me, if we could site on heavy industrial and be an outright permitted use, I promise you my client would
I don't
would
always
make that
trust
happen.
people who are asking for special consideration.
Yeah.
I make them prove it.
Well, I mean, I understand your skepticism, but understand, we did produce documents. I mean, we had an RF engineer under their engineering stamp prepare the report, provide us, these aren't things that are just manufactured for effect at this particular hearing. This is the very beginning of the process that we determine internally once a decision is made that we've got a coverage gap that we need to fill. And so that's where this evidence is coming from. I mean, I understand your skepticism because we're the applicant and I'm going to advocate on behalf of my client. But, I mean, this is pretty substantial evidence from an engineer, a process that we went through. And so I think you have to give some credibility to it. And then, like I said, if you just look at it through the lens of if there was an easier way to do it, we certainly would. It would be to our benefit.
I guess the conclusion I'd reached looking at the map on page 25 is you did look at some land outside the search ring, but you didn't look at all lands outside the search ring as demonstrated on this map that were zoned either light or heavy industrial.
Okay. Any other questions? The only one thought that I had is I'm seeing some cell towers that look like big trees. Does Verizon build any towers like that?
Very few, and that does come up in a lot of these proceedings. Those kinds of designs really only work if you've got other surrounding trees. If you look at it, when you see it in isolation, it's clearly not a tree. And in fact, it adds some bulk to it because you've got the trunk and then branches moving off from it. Now, if it's on a hillside and there are surrounding trees, the purpose for that is so that somebody who's looking from afar, especially if it's a view area, it will blend in with the other trees. But on a site like this where it's just going to be a standalone, I think it's going to create greater greater visual impacts. And so this is not a site that we would typically propose for that. The monopole, I think, is better because it's much sleeker and has less of an impact. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So now we will be taking testimony. So is there any member of the audience that wishes to speak in support of this application? All right. And is there any member of the audience that wishes to speak in opposition to the application? Okay, Commissioner Nyquist.
Madam Mayor, council members, for the record, Roger Nyquist, 2896 Furwood Place, here in Albany. I want to thank you for the opportunity. I am here tonight to support the Planning Commission's decision, unanimous decision 7-0, to deny this application, and I would ask you to do the same. If you'd go to the handout on page 25, which is the applicant's document, I believe, you'll notice the search ring in question. And you'll also notice that the proposed site is in fact outside the search ring. Okay? If you look at my property, the middle tax lot is the tax lot where the bowling center is located. At no point does the search ring touch the property behind the bowling center in which the cell tower is proposed. In addition, we've heard testimony about the precise point and being within 1,500 feet of the precise point. The precise point, and I don't know where it's at in the application, but the precise point references a cross of two streets. Two streets that, as a legal matter, don't exist. Those are internal streets, or internal driveways, if you will, for the residential park inside that property. And so I have a couple thoughts about that. One is that if you're calculating a search ring that's that tight, one would conclude that you would use some GIS tools and some terrain tools, and I just don't know how you get to a point that you can't call up on your GIS system or on your street mapping system. It also makes it more difficult to define where this search ring is and what properties might be available. I do have some handouts I want to submit, and I'll get to these in a minute. Forgot to do it as I was walking up here.
Mr. Nyquist, do you have a copy for?
I do. I made 20. I'm sorry.
Here, right here. A couple of them there. For the, if you want two for those guys. There's an extra. Yeah.
Here's an extra.
It's this one I'm missing.
Here's an extra.
No, I've got that. Is it just a two-page handout?
No.
There's three now coming along.
I just,
My apologies. I had to know better. So I think that if you go to page 127, I'll get to the handouts in a minute, I promise. I accurately describe my opposition to this application. I don't think it meets the code. The code says may, not shall. It's at your discretion. And by nature, some of this is somewhat subjective. What I think matters when I go home tonight after this and have dinner with my wife, what the applicant thinks, this matters to the applicant and their team, but clearly it's your decision, not ours. So it's at your discretion. It is somewhat subjective. I would, the other thing that, in my letter that's not been touched on, in fact, it was discussed at the Planning Commission, was my concern about safety. That's what's driving me to be here before you tonight. There was some reference earlier that in any land use action, there are people who oppose, and that's generally the nature of the beast. In my 20 years in being involved in the public process, I have never opposed an application. And this structure, Lake Shorelines, has been in my family 50 years. We moved to this new location in 2005. Many of you heard the application that allowed that to happen. It's my hope that the facility's there another 50 years, and it's not me looking after it, I hope. Well, I suppose I'd still be around, so that might not be so bad. But the things that can happen with a 120-foot tower 40 feet from your building, some of them aren't good. They can't be good. One of the handouts I passed out to you was the editorial in today's newspaper talking about the fault that runs through our area, and it's not a matter of if, but when, we have a major event. And in an earthquake-type setting, would any of you want a 120-foot tower 40 feet from the structure that you were inviting the public to be in every day? I would submit that you wouldn't. So on page 128 of your packet, it shows, Mr. Hare, I think you asked the question, and this gets to it. It's a map that I did that shows generally where the cell towers are in Albany at this time. And the vast majority of them are in an industrial zone. You have a couple that are in a mixed zone, a mixed use. And if you go to page 131, that's one of the two that's in a mixed-use zone. It's atop the Daniels Law Firm building. I didn't even know it was there until I got the map and looked. And it certainly delivers adequate service. The next one is page 132 is a photo, not a very good one, but a photo of a radio tower up on Knox Butte, in which there are all kinds of apparatuses fixed to. And we've had testimony that the radio tower further to the west won't work. Radio towers just don't work. Well, it's working up there. And then on page 133 is the other cell tower that's in a mixed-use area, and it's next to the old Prairie Market. And it's about 40 feet high. It's not real pretty, but there's trees next to it, and it doesn't stick out all that bad. And then the next page in the documents I gave you that I would like to address is on page 139. I got I guess a cheat sheet, if you will, questions and answers about the Federal Communications Act from one of our congressional office staff members. And on page 139, it clearly spells out your authority here. Clearly, it's your authority and your call as to what you want your community to look like in the way of towers and landscape. And I think you've done a pretty good job. And the counter to the argument the applicant makes is that if you allow a 120-foot tower in mixed-use zone 40 feet behind my bowling center, you're going to have to allow it in every mixed-use zone in town, and I don't think you want to set that precedent. So in summary, and I've not talked about it, but when in 2004, 2005, when I came in to apply to locate the bowling center, Helen Burns-Sharp was here, and you were in the process of creating these village center areas. I think there are 3 in town, maybe 4, I don't know, but I liked it conceptually. I thought my facility would fit. We adapted it in supplying extra food and beverage amenities at our location because of it, and putting a 120-foot tower 40 feet behind my bowling center isn't what I thought I was signing up for. And I think it changes the nature of the zoning. There aren't very many of them in Albany. I think I would submit to you that you need to let them build out. For the last 4 or 5 years, there's not been much built out in this town anywhere. Things are starting to pick up. I would say give these village centers a chance to work. And this proposal, in my view, blows it up. Clearly, this proposal poses a safety risk to my facility and our customers. At the end of this, and my apologies for the length of it, but I'm going to ask that they play a video for you of ice falling from cell towers in inclement weather. And I don't want it happening at my facility. We went over to the Planning Commission, and the response to that was, well, it's happened once in Mississippi, and the weather in Oregon is different, and it just won't happen here. Well, I don't know if any of you saw it twice last winter during the inclement weather, but in out driving around and taking employees to and from work, there were a number of times I saw ice coming off the power lines as it warmed or cooled, and it, luckily it wasn't in the road, and luckily there wasn't a lot of wind blowing. But to say that it can't happen here, I don't understand how they get there, and it is a real concern for me. Also, again, if that thing falls over, and I'm not saying it will anytime soon especially, but if that thing falls over, the top of it, if it fell directly east, would land about the table behind lanes 7 and 8 where somebody could be having pizza. I don't know why I'm exposed to that risk. There are better suited locations for this project. One of the handouts I gave you included an area just a little further to the east than the search ring. And again, I tried to measure it and couldn't because I couldn't pin down exactly the precise point that they're claiming is the center of the search ring. But if you go down Marion to 41st, there are a number of industrial properties down there. There are buildings that are much, much, much taller, and I would submit to you would be much better suited for this tower than the proposal. And I got to touch on the fact that the city of Albany has, you have a policy in place saying that you can't, if you're going to put a tower up, it's got to be at least as far away from a public road as it is tall. And I would argue that you do that, in fact, to protect the public's interest. You protect the public road in the event of a catastrophic event. And I believe you should do the same for a structure where the public gathers. In the end, I am opposed. I think it doesn't fit. I think putting 120-foot towers in mixed-use residential properties is not good public policy, and you will come to regret it later. But if you're inclined to do it, because it's subjective and you're the decision maker, I would ask that you at least move this thing far enough away from my building that if it falls down, it doesn't hit my building.
Okay, questions, Bessie?
Roger, Mr. Connor said that it was 40 feet from the property line, he thought. How far is the bowling alleys back from the property line? Or from?
In that area, I think it's about 8 feet.
So it
Right,
is real
and a lane
close.
is 60 feet long, and you do the math out, and you're right there.
Okay, so it is real close, so that's only like 48 feet then, okay.
That wall,
Yeah,
that's how close.
yeah, because I wasn't clear. All right, thank you.
Yeah, Ray?
Two questions, Roger. The notwithstanding location of the tower, going back to the height thing, which, like you said, is a subjective call. If it were there, do you perceive literally any problems or any way that it would affect your business simply by the fact that it was there?
If you allow the current proposal of the 120-foot tower,
People would
40 feet
stop
from
coming
the...
to your businesses?
I was not all that fired up about this application until some of the neighborhood mothers raised my attention to it, who miniature golfed, and they indicated it wasn't their preference. I also, in the application process, gave up more than an acre of property to create some open space, and so we have a nice ambiance there. I mean, again, that's all subjective. The real answer is, I don't know. I surely doubt it would affect my bowling business.
Or possibly the go-kart business or whatever.
Right. But look, that's not the issue for me here today.
And then the other thing, you showed this photograph on page 133, this one right here.
Okay.
Page 133.
Prime market, yep.
And you said you hadn't noticed that before. Until I had seen a lot of these photographs that came in our packet, I didn't notice a lot of the towers either, because I just don't notice them. It's not something I pay that much attention to. But more importantly, because it is a subjective call, this particular building, a tower, looks like it is literally within like 5 feet of the wall of the business.
Sure, and again, I think it's about 40 feet tall, and if you'll notice, the trees next to it are actually taller in the building. I would also note in the last 8 years, that building has been leased about 18 months.
Right, well, I don't think that has anything to do with because the tower's there. My question is, if 50 foot is okay, is 60, is 65, is 70, where do you draw the line that it's acceptable?
Well, for me, the rule that you have for city streets, that it be at least as far away from a structure as it is tall, is where I would draw the line. In the way of ambiance and your skyline and how things look, again, that's subjective, and you're the policymakers.
My strong perception is, right or wrong, is that this is a classic case of NIMBY, not in my backyard. We want the cell coverage, but I don't want that tower where I can see it. That's just my...
Well, I'm sorry to hear you interpret my testimony that way.
Any other questions, Roger?
Thank you for the opportunity, and I want to play the video for you. And
okay.
Again, I need to do the whole 5 minutes because in the testimony received, it was one anecdotal case in Mississippi.
Where is this video? I mean, do we know?
I don't know.
Is there any context particularly?
No, it's ice falling off cell towers, YouTube search.
Okay.
That was too close.
Sounds like people are just frightened to death.
Yeah, really. The last one.
Big stuff, big stuff, big stuff, big stuff.
Okay. Is there anyone else that would like to come up and speak in opposition? Yes, Bill?
Madam Mayor, City Council, thank you very much. My name is Bill Riles. I'm an architect here in town at 935 Jones Avenue Northwest. I'm here tonight because I came to the hearing at the Planning Commission and spoke to them, and I felt that it was necessary to come tonight and reiterate essentially what I said before. I have some handouts. I'm not sure if I've got quite enough for everybody. I have them for the applicant, and maybe somebody will have to share. I'll try not to take too long. Since that hearing, I'd just like to share a little bit of an anecdote. one of the issues that came up is how visible are these, and how much of an impact do they have visually on an area. It's true that a lot of times you don't notice them, but once you start looking for them, you sort of see where they are. And so this last weekend, I attended a wedding up at Orcas Island from my godson. And my family, I have 2 boys, and we made a little bit of a game out of seeing how many cell towers we could find on the drive up I-5 from Albany to past almost to the Canadian border. There are a lot of them. And they seem to locate along the freeways because that's where the traffic is and that's where people are along that I-5 corridor. One of the things you will notice about most of them, and I tried to, there were several questions asked at the hearing in regard to, well, how tall is 120 feet? What is the average size cell tower? What are the other cell towers in town? And the applicant seemed to have no answer for that. And that to me is suspicious. If I come to you with a church, let's say, that I want to have I'll have to go through the similar process of conditional use to put a church somewhere because of the impacts that it has. I would expect you to expect me to know, what other churches are around, what impacts they have, how big is my church compared to other churches. And the fact that there doesn't seem to be a lot of information about what these are, and I think I understand why, because we did sort of, you can start to, I have a little application on my phone that can tell you how tall something is, and once you get a feeling for them, you see that a majority of them are not that tall along the highways, and many of them, it was pointed out that there are 50-foot power lines adjacent to this property, and that's true. They run down the highway and and 50 feet is pretty tall for a power line, but it's not extremely tall. And one of the things you'll notice in sort of the third page there is a comparison of a power line that's probably about, and a cell tower next to it. One of the things I noticed up and down the freeway is that most of the towers did not stick up above the skyline very far, that they were sort of nested down into their surroundings. And it was very unusual that you'd see a tower that stood very much higher than its surroundings. There is a visual impact to these, and all communities up and down the valley care about that. And it's very rare to see one that really sticks up above your visual sightlines or the background sightlines. So one of the so the first, I guess I should start with just my general concern, and that has to do with the Village Center plan. And as Roger alluded to, Helen Burnsharp and Don Donovan and the people who put together this plan not so many years ago that included these village centers, and I was involved in that as well, and I believe that's a very good plan. The first handout I gave you shows the surrounding neighborhoods on the bottom with a little, I just drew in the line of the tiny little area that is the village center, and then there's a close-up showing the bowling alley and the rest of that village center. And when we looked at the property, the subject property, it's quite large, but it is covered about, 75% with riparian zones and with open space and those kinds of things. So there's really not a lot left of the village square, village center, to be developed. And you also have other requirements in the planning code which don't allow direct parking lots between, say, 53rd and those buildings. You're going to have to get off the 53rd. You have a certain distance from the intersection. You have to come back. And so essentially, Willetta Street, which is on the opposite side, will have to be extended across, whether that's a public street or a private public street. And we've sort of been splitting hairs. I know the code says you have to be a certain distance away from a public right-of-way. Well, I really, in my mind, I don't see the difference between a publicly improved street and a private street. The public still uses it exactly the same, and any safety issues that I would have would apply to both of those streets. The only real place to bring access onto that triangular site that either ODOT would let you do or Ron Irish would let you do is really across from Willetta. You don't have room between Willetta and the highway because there's a light there, and you have the issues of cars backing up along that. And every parcel in this zone is required to be interconnected, so the roadways have to connect from parcel to parcel to parcel. Roger has got that on his site. He's got both of his parking lots could connect onto the adjacent properties. And when you develop a property, you need the roads, the infrastructure, parking lots in order to make that happen. And so there's no way that that cell tower doesn't impact that infrastructure and impact those roads and make it very difficult to develop that site. So the other issue that was mentioned was that this is, that the council or that the planning commission turned this down because of the height of the tower. And that may be so, but my main concern is not really the height, but it's really the width and the distance out from that, the impact of that, eating up potential roadways, potential living areas. You ask, well, how far from a given structure should one of these towers be? Well, when codes estimate risk, if it's an industrial building, a fairly strong building, and people aren't in it a lot, or it's a warehouse or something, it would be one thing. If it were an apartment building where people are living 24/7, there are kids and families present, it would be quite another. And since that's one of the reasons you zone these things in industrial areas. You realize that industrial areas have greater risk involved. And so these towers, that's why they're located there. The other issue, I guess Roger brought it up, but I think it's worth saying again, is that if you approve this, then you do set a precedent for other like areas within the town. And the federal law says that you cannot discriminate. You can decide, well, we will allow these in certain areas and not other areas, but once you allow them in one area, you can't say to AT&T, well, now you can't build your 120-foot cell tower in this other village center. That would be discriminatory. And then the issue that the property owner understands how his site should be developed, and I'm sure he does, but I've never met a property owner who really agreed totally with the zoning or the restrictions. I'm sure he doesn't like the open space either. That doesn't mean we're going to change our open space. And zoning is there to benefit the entire area, not just an individual property owner. It's not just where it's best located on his property, is where is this best located for the entire district. And my concern is if you put this in there with the impact that it has and the difficulty we have right now economically with developing things, it would not be I live very close to another city center or village center. It's North Albany Village. And it's a great little center. It gets used a lot. There are a lot of restaurants there. There's a lot of activity. There is a cell tower near there. It happens to be quite a ways away, and it's much shorter. It's maybe about 50, 60 feet tall, and it's in the area where they have the storage next to the highway. You can't really see it from the village center. The hope is that something like North Albany Center, maybe a little smaller, because it clearly would be in this location. Clearly, Verizon wants to increase their infrastructure because there are more users, there are more people, and all it takes is one industry to move into that part of town. And I think, in South Albany, we've just gone through this big plan about, we really see that potentially South Albany could see a lot of growth and a lot more neighbors there using more cell phone, yes, but also in need of something like this village center. And then the mitigation, it was mentioned by the applicant that they've mitigated this as much as possible. And I have to kind of beg to differ on that. And Sharon, you mentioned about the trees. Well, if you do a little search, a lot of municipalities, and there's a lot of lawsuits and stuff, are very opposed to these cell towers being near nice areas, whether it's Carmel or Taos, New Mexico, or whatever. And there are a lot of proposed solutions. Yes, they're very expensive. Yes, they limit the ability of the cell tower maybe to co-locate other towers. The applicant at the time was requesting that they not be required to put the required buffering, landscape buffering, because there was no water, and so that they would like to get away with just a fence, and that they were proposing a generator that was kind of loud, and maybe they could use a whisper-quiet generator. None of those seem to me the mitigation to the maximum extent. It just seems sort of the opposite. The one cell tower that I included there is behind, kind of behind the Taco Bell at Pacific and Queen. And it sits back in an industrial area by the railroad tracks. And they were required to put in landscaping and those sorts of things, and you can kind of see what the condition of those is today. I'm not saying this is Verizon Tower, I don't know whose tower it is, but these things need to be maintained, and clearly, in this case, they weren't. City doesn't have staff to go around and make sure that those are maintained. And then the applicant made quite a bit of point out of the fact that this conditional use process is expensive, and if they had a reasonable alternative, they wouldn't be here. And I'm pretty sure that the cost of this conditional use application versus the cost of, say, putting in 2 towers or a lease, the lease agreements can be quite expensive. The cost of a conditional use application is much less, and given, I don't know what the specifics are, but it's understandable that this would be a process you could go through if the lease was good and you could get away with 1 tower. And then it was brought up by staff as well that these other properties turned them down for some reason. There must be good reasons to turn these down. Roger also brought up the possibility of earthquake. He didn't talk about high wind events. These towers are susceptible to that. I did design the bowling alley, so I'm aware that we did have to design the bowling alley to a much higher earthquake standard because it has so many people in it. And so I kind of went through that quickly. I guess that's all I have to say. I think it would be unfortunate to allow this here because it would directly impact the potential viability of that village center. It's great with Roger there and his bowling alley and his putt-putt golf and potential little racetrack, but the village center is really envisioned for more than that. And by putting this here, it will make it just very difficult to reach a critical enough mass to make the thing work. I suppose it can be developed in some ways, but to really make it a village center, to take advantage of those wetlands there, to have restaurants with balconies overlooking the wetlands, and to really create a sense of place there, I think would be drastically diminished. If you do decide to, and I understand that Verizon has to be somewhere. I am not an engineer involved with that, but I do understand that the valley is very flat and that you can see these things for miles, and it is line of sight, and that 1 tower that's tall can see farther and therefore is a lot cheaper than 2 towers that are shorter that could still see those distances. But I don't have any expertise in that per se, other than just sort of the understanding that these things are fairly rational. So if you were inclined to allow this to go there, I would think at least it should meet the part of the code at the end. I don't have it in front of me, so I was going to read it, but essentially says that anything that goes in these village centers needs to respect the scale and the design and the feeling of that village center. And I can see in no way that this applicant has made any attempt to even address that in the smallest way.
Okay.
Thank you.
Questions of Bill? Okay, all
Thanks,
right,
Bill.
thank you, Bill. Is there anyone else that would like to speak in opposition of the application? Okay, yep.
I didn't come prepared like everybody else. I just kind of took some notes.
Fine, yeah.
Mayor Canopa, thank you. I see a lot of familiar faces. It does turn out that every time I'm here is involved with Schneider Homes somehow. I think this is... Oh, sorry.
What's your name?
Eddie Merrifield, 2030 Kodiak Avenue Southwest, about a quarter mile from the proposed location. As I started to say, it does seem like every time I'm here, it's somehow to do with Schneider Homes. The applicant says that the property owner seems to know what's best for the property. I believe that his address is in Washington, and I don't think he's been active in Albany development since about 2004-ish. I think the last time I saw anything active with Schneider Homes was when Roger applied for the conditional use permit, or when they were doing the planning. I could be wrong. I don't scan the records, but there was that. and then there was the Schneider Homes tried to sell to the LDS Church, and we ended up with a park there instead. It does seem like, though, they have become very inactive in this area. So to say that they know what's best for the area probably is inaccurate. It's been almost 10 years, and my memory is a little bit sketchy. One of the things I remember, I've been listening to the different details here. They're talking about the right-of-way. I thought that when the original plan was written up and the last gentleman spoke about it, that Willetta was supposed to be pushed through. And whether you call that a road or it was written up that traffic was supposed to flow through Willetta behind the bowling center, so that would be whether it's a right-of-way is considered a road or a right-of-way is where people are designed to go through. I'm not sure, but that does seem like it would be encroaching a right-of-way. So a little bit about me. I've lived here 37 of my 41 years. First of all, I've never heard Pacific Boulevard referred to as Albany Junction City Highway. That was a new one for me. But very recently, I was diagnosed with high blood pressure. I took up running. I live down at the end of 53rd. I come through that area almost every morning on my runs, and the sunrise, over that area, overlooking Rogers Building and the eastern sky is beautiful. And I've been picturing where that cell tower is going to sit. And it's not that it's going to sit, if you look at the Prairie Market pictures you guys held up earlier, or some of the other things, those cell towers are located away from lines of sight. They're located adjacent or very near other things that reduce their visual impact on the site that you're seeing. Where this cell tower is proposed is literally right smack in the view. If I took and put a basketball hoop right in the middle of there, I can't imagine the impact being any different than where this cell tower is proposed to be located. That doesn't fit with the neighborhood. That neighborhood has open space, wetlands, park, the preserved area with that long nature trail. The nature trail would go, I'm guessing, 75 to 100 feet to the west of where the tower is proposed to be located, maybe a little bit more. And there's no other vegetation that's more than, 25 or 30 feet in that open wetlands area. So this is something that would very much stick out and become an eyesore. It would not be consistent with that. I listened to, like everybody else, and I think most of the people in town are familiar with the fact that if you drive down Pacific Boulevard, there's lots of industrial property that seems to have been vacant or unused as long as I can remember. But I've sat in here when they were talking about the piano property, which is right across the street. I thought that was industrial. The Pepsi property, which is right on the other side of the railroad tracks, which I thought was industrial. So hearing that there was no industrial property that was available to have this on does seem counter to what I believe to know about the town. And it made me think, is there none available, or is there none, same thing other people said, is there none available at the cost that they're willing to pay? And I would propose that there is actually industrial space available. That's really all I have to say. No, one last thing. I'm a Verizon customer. My service at my house sucks. I keep waiting for the "can you hear me now" guy to show up literally in my front room and say, "Can you hear me now?" I say, "No, he can't," because I have bad service. I am dying for some better service. I'm a technology guy. I'm on my phone doing things constantly. I am torn as a technology guy saying this isn't something that I want, but as somebody that is very connected to that neighborhood and raising a kid there and spends a lot of time out there, I don't think it fits. Thank you for your time. And I got to thank you guys for your service, because I don't know how you can do this every week or monthly, because it's rough. Thank you.
Thank you, Eddie. Good seeing you. It's been a while. Okay, is there anyone else that would like to speak in opposition to the application? All right. Is there any member of the audience that wishes to speak who is neither in favor nor in opposition to the application? Yes.
Thank you for your time. My name is Dan Johnson. I live on 5148 Willetta Street, just about 500 feet from the location. My concern is, and at the initial hearing, we talked about additional traffic on Walletta, and they decided to move the street, their access away from Walletta, just to help give a zero impact on Walletta, and I really appreciate that. I mean, if you crossed it, immediate cross there, we'd have to do some mitigation, traffic calming stuff on Walletta. My hope would be to close it completely from Walletta to 53rd, but that doesn't seem to be very popular, but thank you for your time.
All right, thank you, Dan. Anyone else that would like to speak as neutral? All right, okay, that's our testimony, and does the applicant have any rebuttal testimony?
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Again, for the record, Mike Connors. I'm going to go through some of the comments responding to some of the testimony that you heard, but before I do that, I want to throw out at least some suggestions on a possible continuance and us addressing and providing more information on a few issues. First one is Mr. Nyquist. It's clear to me, I understood that this was one of his concerns, but hearing it firsthand, because I wasn't at the Planning Commission, that he said it. The reason I'm here is I'm concerned about safety concerns and the proximity of this facility to his building. And again, the code doesn't impose any kind of setback requirement. We're not in violation of anything. But we understand he's the most impacted party. He's the most adjacent party. And in picking the particular location on this site, we worked with the property owner and determined that this would work best in terms of, like I said earlier, combination of both minimizing any impact on future development, but also to use the existing building as mitigation. If you feel that the use of the location being in close proximity to that building is not of much mitigation, and Mr. Nyquist is concerned about its proximity, we're willing to talk further with the property owner and see if there is a different location on the same site that we could propose this that would be further away from his building. So we offer that up as a potential concession. I can't promise you that we'll find one, but from what I've heard, knowing that he's the most impacted party here, I at least want to explore that, because I can't say here today that the specific site is the only site that will work. Second thing is, there have been a number of questions and some speculation in the testimony about why we didn't pick different sites. And unfortunately, one of the handicaps that I have is the particular person, Mr. Jaggers with Black Rock, is not here today. He had a conflict. He couldn't be here for this hearing. And so I don't want you to operate off of speculation that, well, maybe we're doing this because we don't want to pay rates as high. I want to get you the specific information, because I know that the specific information is not that somebody didn't want to pay our rate, and so that's why we're here today. But I can't say that based on my own direct knowledge, and so we can do that, provide that information, provide you more specifics about those property owners that said they're unwilling to lease and why. So those are two things that I will throw out as something that we're willing to consider, and we would do a continuance. We'd come back to another hearing, provide you either a new location or explain why we can't change the location, and provide you more specific information on some of these questions that you've had and some others have raised about why these particular properties were unwilling to lease. But with that being said, I do want to at least use this opportunity to just kind of address or reinforce a couple of issues in response to some of the testimony that you heard. First of all, I want to remind you that when we talk about whether this type of facility is a good facility or an appropriate facility for this zone, Your code allows it. It subjects it to conditional use criteria, but it allows this specific kind of facility, and if it's up to 50 feet, it's outright permitted. You don't have any discretion. And if it's greater, you do have discretion. But the idea that this is incompatible just because of the nature of the use in this zone, I think is directly contrary to what your own code provides. And if you were to adopt that kind of an interpretation, you have a number of zones where this is allowed as a conditional use that you would effectively be adopting the same kind of interpretation. The issue of the height is really what you're being asked to look at. You have a Planning Commission interpretation that basically says because this is taller, significantly taller than the existing structure and the maximum height of buildings allowed in the zone, that makes it incompatible, per se. That's what you're being asked to either adopt or reject or modify. If you do adopt that interpretation, it will set precedent, because it will establish that you have made a determination that any of these structures that's greater than either those existing structures or maximum building height, that doesn't satisfy these criteria, including the criteria that, under the telecommunications facility criteria, 8.500, apply to every single proposal, even if it's an outright permitted use. I don't think that the converse is true, that if you were to determine that's not the interpretation that we want to adopt under our code, that somehow that means that any particular carrier coming in is going to be able to say, we get the exact same thing. Because you do have to evaluate it on a specific basis. Have they demonstrated that they've gone through the hierarchy and the other sites aren't available? Is there evidence to that effect? Is it the minimum height necessary? What is the surrounding area? And again, this area, there's a lot of open space in this area if it's in close proximity. So you would be able to factor those in. But I think the converse is not true. If this doesn't satisfy it based just on a per se rule that it's taller than the structures in the existing area, then that is going to establish more concrete, objective precedent. And I don't think that's what you adopted as part of your code, because had you done that, you wouldn't have allowed towers greater than 50 feet. You would have just said it can't be greater than 50 feet because we determined that that's not compatible, and that's not what your code provides for. There was some testimony about Mr. Riles, I'm sorry, I might butcher your last name, talked about we weren't providing the information on the other towers in the area, and that there was some suspicion. Why wouldn't we know that? Well, we don't typically do that, but we did do that now. And I just want to make sure that you understand, I think you understand that we did do that. And just in looking through and sort of the suggestion that this tower is unusually tall, I thought, you know what, I'm just going to go through that and run through the real list of all the towers that we identified. What are the heights? So here they are. 275 feet, 146, 170, 140, 125, 120. A 70-footer, although it's a lattice tower, 105, 185, 170, 100 foot, but that's on the courthouse rooftop, and 130 feet. Those are the towers in the surrounding area. So this is not unusual. You know, and again, I don't want you to get the impression that somehow we're trying to do this really tall tower just because we want extra height. This is consistent with the other towers in the area. This is consistent with the industry standards. I mean, you rarely see something that's that significantly shorter or smaller than this. And you know, there was the point about, again, I believe it was you, Councilor Collins, that, you know, mentioned about doing two towers and all that, and I think you heard some testimony about, well, why can't you do that? You know, number one, I want you to make sure you understand that that's speculation. Nobody's coming in here and saying they can do it, and here's how they can do it. They're saying, well, what if? Maybe they can do that. And you have to base your decision on evidence. Your standard is substantial evidence. It's not speculation. But then you have a policy issue. Even if that could be the case, do you want a bunch of small towers around the city? Or do you want one tall tower that's going to be able to do the job? I think your code suggests that it's the latter, because you don't impose height restrictions. but you do impose these requirements to co-locate and to do these types of other things that minimize the number of these facilities. I think that's the policy you've adopted, and I think that's the better policy that you should adhere to. There were some questions raised about this particular developer and whether, they know what they're doing with their property, et cetera, and, whether they're checked out, what have you. Well, that's the purpose for us providing a concept plan. They actually have given some thought to how they've developed this property. And granted, that's only a concept plan, but that's a lot more than what you would typically get when somebody would say, I don't know, I might do something here, but why don't you stick it in that corner? I mean, this is a developer who's given thought to how they're going to develop the property and are factoring in a specific lease site for us that's going to minimize that impact. I think that's far more than I ever typically have available for me when I am involved in these kind of proceedings. And I want to make sure that you understand, again, you're reviewing the Planning Commission decision. In terms of impact on future development, nobody is saying, nor is there a criteria, we're talking about impact on future development other than this site. It's this site. That's what the Planning Commission determined, that they were concerned about the impact on the future development on this site. And so, as I indicated earlier, we've got a developer with a concept plan who is involved in determining where to site this particular facility to minimize that impact. And there's no evidence to the contrary. There's speculation about what could be the case, but there's no actual evidence. I do want to just note, I think it was Mr. Mayerfield, if I got his name correct, he lives in this area, and he confirmed he has bad service. This is not something that we're manufacturing. This is truly a need. And so as you're evaluating this decision, yes, there are impacts, and yes, you have to deal with those impacts, but you also have to make sure that you are providing this service for the community. Because if you don't provide it on this site, then our customers are not going to have the service. Like we indicated, this is the site. We don't know where we're going to go if we can't go on this site. And then you've established precedent for other carriers that when they come and they have to build out further in their network, that people are going to say, well, you interpret your code to say can't be too tall, even if that's what they determine there's a need. And I think you really have to give that some weight. This is an important service that's being provided. I mean, we all know the proliferation of the number of people using wireless services and dropping landlines and what they're using them for, the type of data. I mean, that's what's driving part of the need for additional coverage. It's not just the number of users, but it's that we've gone from making a phone call to looking at the internet and texting and emailing and doing all that. That requires not just a coverage of an area, but capacity. And if you don't interpret and apply your code in a way that allows carriers in a reasonable manner to build that out, you're going to stifle that. And I don't think you should, and that's why I think you wrote your code the way you did, and I just think, unfortunately, the Planning Commission just got sort of askew on what it really meant. And so with that, that concludes my rebuttal. I can take any questions, and I would be happy to discuss, our proposal to do continuance to address those issues that I identified, if that's what you would like us to do.
Well, I wanted to speak to the council is used to hearing about requests for continuances or leaving the record open in the context of land use, and I want to make clear that since this is not the first hearing on this matter, you are not obligated. You have discretion to leave the record open or to continue the matter. One thing you might consider doing, because I think everyone would like it if all of the parties involved resolved all their concerns, although I don't know if that would address the Planning Commission's concerns. But what you might consider doing is making your tentative decision one way or the other. That is not a final decision. And then you could leave the record open for input from the applicant. I mean, we could delay. If the applicant is willing to grant an extension, I would suggest 30 days to the 180-day time limit, that we could then delay the submission of findings. And if we had something submitted that you wanted to consider. If you want to leave the record open for that consideration, you could. Actually, the more I think about it, that's a bad idea, because the problem is you're then going to have to address in revised findings the new evidence submitted when you get written comments. So it's up to you. I've made it unclear, let me make it clear again. Whether or not you wish to leave the record open or continue the matter is a matter of discretion. You're not under any legal obligation to do so.
Okay. What would the council like to do?
Bob wanted to correct me on something.
Well, no, I didn't want to correct you, but just in terms of considering whether or not you would like to continue the public hearing or continue the public hearing, you might think about if the information the applicant suggested they might provide would help you make a decision based on the criteria, if that would influence or help you better understand whether or not the criteria are satisfied. You might think about that in terms of whether or not you want to continue.
Yeah, if the only issue, that's a good point. If the only issue is whether or not you get peace in the neighborhood because of a compromise, that doesn't really address any of the criteria you're dealing with.
Well, if I can just add to that, I mean, I do like that idea of maybe giving some consideration to what we're talking about. If you, as a group, were to feel that the proximity to the bowling alley is a major issue and you don't think we comply, then that would be something that you could, deliberate about, and we could then use that as an opportunity to try to address that issue. If you were to determine that, you don't have enough information in terms of the other properties and why they were, the property owner was unwilling to lease, then that would be something we do. If those don't have any relevancy, then I agree that a continuance and us providing that information wouldn't necessarily be helpful. But if it is, then we would like the opportunity to do that, because we believe that we can, provide you information that, hopefully will make you feel more comfortable, for sure on the other property lease rate issue, but also hopefully on the location and proximity of the bowling alley.
Okay, but what we're going to need to know, though, is whether we're going to want to continue the public hearing before we would close it to deliberate.
Well, I think that's right. I think you ought to ask if any counselor wants to would take a motion. Somebody would need to make a motion to either continue the hearing or leave the record open. In the absence of a motion, you would proceed with a decision tonight.
Okay.
I move that we
Right.
continue the hearing. Dates are the 24th. Rich is gone now. There's no rush to say it has to be done within a certain time.
Well, there is.
Yeah.
There is. Under the law, there's a requirement to make a decision within 180 days of the application being complete. So you will have to negotiate at least corresponding extension of the 180-day time limit. 120, beg your pardon.
And we would be willing to do that. We certainly don't want to rush this process.
Okay, so there's a motion to continue the hearing.
I would second
And
that.
what was our date? Ray, did you state a date?
Set a date.
Okay.
So whatever it is within those limits that you're talking about.
Okay,
so.
continue, and then Bessie,
second it.
second the motion. Okay.
May I suggest, why don't you see if there are 4 votes for a continuance. If there are, come back and give us a date certain so that we can have our timing set.
Okay.
So, because we have to make certain that the extension is going to line up with what you're going to request on time. There may or may not be 4 votes for continuing it at all. I don't know.
So the motion's just for continue the hearing. Is there discussion? Yeah, Bill?
I see a value in it. One of the things that Jeff Chrisman used to say really irked him was the information that was dropped on him, sight unseen, and you have the 2 hours to try and absorb that at the same time listening and so forth. I don't think additional information is certainly going to hurt the process, and additional clarification and possibly some flexibility. So that's the value I see in a continuation.
Okay. And Wes?
Yeah, just a suggestion perhaps, if the council is inclined to go with a continuance. It seemed to me that the objections that I heard boiled down to sort of 2 issues, one being safety and the other being appearance. I don't know what you can do about appearance, but it seems like there might be data. We just had an earthquake. Cell phone or cell towers are constructed to building code standards. I would think the industry has a sense of how they do. Perhaps there's some data. We saw some pictures that showed ice falling. We saw happy people running away from the ice falling, which I thought was a little strange. But is there information that indicates these things are, I mean, data that shows rather than just perception?
But the concern is, if you're looking at safety, that is not a criteria of this decision. So to invite leaving the record open for that muddles us legally, unless you're looking for specific safety information on the difference between a 50-foot and a 120-foot. If it's safety,
that's what I'm looking for.
Okay. The other thing I want to advise you or caution you about, and it depends on what you're intending to do, if you continue this so that you can get a bunch more technical information about the alternative locations and the need for this location, you're going to get a lot of data on one side of the issue.
Right.
Because I don't think staff has the resources to look at it independently, and I doubt seriously if the opponents do. So that's your call.
Okay, so any more discussion on the motion? Okay, yeah, Rich?
I think we're spinning our wheels. I mean, what are you going to get that's going to convince you? Now, what I heard is a lot of technical information, some of which a lot of people are going to understand, and some of which only an electrical engineer is going to understand, and we're not going to understand most of that. I think we know whether or not our planning commission does its due diligence. We're not just talking about whether or not they're right. The perception is a big part of, this whole thing. When you talk about whether or not it fits, and that's the kind of thing we have them for. If we then second guess them, telling them your perception is wrong, I think that sends us down the wrong road. Are they wrong sometimes? We're all wrong sometimes.
Well, I do need to caution you, however, that since this is a de novo decision, your decision should not be based on affirming or overruling the Planning Commission, with all due respect for the grounds you indicate, because it's got to be based on the facts and evidence presented to you in this proceeding.
Second reason, I hear a lot of talk about, oh, gee, this is the only spot, and frankly, that's just plain wrong. Technically, I mean, when you had everything on the top of Knox Butte, they were adjusting their transmitters and adjusting their receivers so they would block things out in the past. I mean, there are other places they can go. I mean, it's like you're walking in. Well, I shouldn't be talking to you. I'm sorry.
I'm not taking it personally.
Yeah, well,
I understand.
No,
I understand.
As a function of the speech. Telling us that we have to do something because it's federal law when clearly there is big question about that. I mean, I realize that lawyers are advocating for their client. However, I see pieces of it that I know have holes in them. And I don't think we should waste the time. I just don't think we should waste the time.
Bessie?
Yeah. The question I have is, after all the discussion we're having with the continuance, were you going to talk to the landowner to find out if there's another part of the site that might be available that would not affect the bowling alley, like on the, it's 6.5 acres, it's way over there? I mean, because that's another reason I thought a continuance would be good, because if they find a different area on the property is better, then maybe it's more feasible to do it that way.
So you have a motion on the table,
Yeah.
and this is for continuing the hearing.
Right.
Any more discussion on that motion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Can we get a roll call, Teresa?
Counselor Coburn?
Yes.
Collins?
No.
Johnson?
Yes.
Callum?
No.
Obsensky,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
motion passed.
Okay.
You need to give now an indication of the date to which you are continuing it. We can't simply have an open-ended
Okay.
extension. We've got to have a date.
Well, you mentioned 30 days. Can we compute that to a date?
I would recommend September 24th. That would be your second council meeting in
Right.
September. That gives some time to...
And will the applicant consent to a corresponding extension of the 120-day time limit?
We will. And I think September 24th is a good date, because it gives us enough time to do what we need to do, get the information in a timely manner to the city, and put you in a position of walking into the next hearing understanding.
And am I understanding then that the council is intending to you have not narrowed the continued hearing to anything, so that will mean that all issues will be back on the table again, and you'll be doing this again? Okay.
Continuing the public hearing, yeah.
We're not
Okay.
going to have to hear the whole testimony.
You will if it is offered.
So
You will if it is offered.
I just realized, I was looking at my calendar, I do have another hearing on the 24th.
Can we push it out more then? Would that work? So in October? It'd be the second Wednesday of October would be our next meeting.
I will be gone.
You'll be gone?
Where are you going, Floyd?
October 8th.
Uh-huh.
You run on the 8th?
Yeah, we should get like 4.
I can send Sean.
With that,
Yeah, I think that would work.
we won't have a full council that night. But the only thing would be is if there's not, would have to maybe be a decision. It just depends on what the vote would be till the 2 weeks
As
later.
long as they have a quorum.
Yeah. Oh,
Well,
yeah.
you understand, in Albany, we have a charter requirement. We can't make a decision without 4 votes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Is it something we can do at a work session or not?
yes?
I mean, we could,
That's
if
a
the
legal
council wants to
meeting.
schedule it on a Monday, what does the work sessions look like for September, Marilyn?
We have,
Second, then?
Our work sessions are the Monday prior to our
we have one work
Wednesday.
session in September,
only one?
only one.
So it's
Because we
pretty
have
full.
what would be the second one is a joint meeting with the Benton County Board of Commissioners.
Okay.
That's Wes's.
So would the October 8th be okay?
Yeah, I think that would work better, because unfortunately, it's another hearing I can't get out of.
I
I
understand.
couldn't even get it
yeah.
continued.
May I suggest that you might consider further clarifying? There's no reason you should go through this all over again. I would suggest that you set a time limit right now for the second continuance, or for the continuance, since it's only to deal with narrow issues, and that you allow not more than 20 minutes for those in support and 20 minutes for those in opposition. Do you see any problem with
I don't.
time limits of that
I
nature?
think that's a good approach.
So
You would need to do that by motion. You'll need to set a
Are we
date.
talking about having this in the
No,
it's
it's
got to
here.
be in here.
It is.
Because if we have it in there, you can't hear what the
Right.
people are
No.
testimony.
It isn't,
Can't hear
it
that
isn't,
stuff.
Dick. So how about a motion then, council? So that would be setting this for October 8th. It's a which is a continuance, and you're going to set time limits of 20 minutes on each side.
I'm opposed to time limits.
Okay.
I'm opposed to it.
Was there, is there even a motion for what's being suggested here?
Yes, what you said.
Okay.
Second.
All
Did your
right.
motion include the time limit? I'm just trying to
Yes,
It
understand.
did. Or,
I'm fine.
that part is what I said. Okay. So the motion then is for October 8th, and it would be for setting time limits on 20 minutes on each side. And there's been a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. And
3
roll
and 3.
call. Sounded like it.
Counselor Coburn?
Yes.
Collins?
Yes.
Johnson?
No.
Kellum?
No.
Obsensky?
Yes.
Olson?
I'm opposed because I'm opposed to putting time limits on it.
Okay, and I will vote no because I don't like time limits, so.
Okay.
Okay, but do we need a motion for the October 8th?
Yes.
Okay, did we get that?
Motion for the meeting to be October 8th with no time limits.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, motion carried. All right, I think we got it set.
Appreciate it very much.
Okay?
Wait, staff would like some clarification.
Yes.
So just to clarify that the applicant gave an extension to the 120-day decision-making rule for the same number of days between now and October 8th.
October 8th.
Correct.
And for our own records, we would request that you provide something in writing.
Within 24 hours.
Okay. We can do that.
Well,
24 hours
why don't we
being
do
10
this?
o'clock
Wait a minute,
tomorrow?
because then we risk an issue. So, just for clarification, why don't you simply give us we're talking from now till October 8th, so how about a 45-day extension of the 120-day time limit?
Yeah,
Is that satisfactory?
That would be simple, yes.
Yep. You mean, do that on the record here, 45-day?
We don't need anything in writing. You've said on the record, we've got a
We've
date
said it,
now.
so we're okay.
Okay.
Thank
Okay,
you. I should have made that more clear.
Oh, that's okay. Those are
Whatever.
tough, the 120 days.
And then if any written material is submitted and you'd like that to be included in the packet that goes to City Council, that should be submitted to us 2 weeks before October 8th, so we have time to
Prepare the
prepare it
packet.
and get it in the
Okay.
packet.
And just a cover memo,
Yeah, I think we can do that.
2 weeks prior to October 8th.
Right, anything else, staff, on that? Okay, anything else on that? All right, okay.
Appreciate your
thank you.
time very much.
Yep. With that, I think we will take a 5-minute recess.
Thank you.
All right. We've got business from the public and just a couple items.
Why do we need a recess?
And I would imagine others do too. forward to us this evening.
Oh, right.
Okay, sure. Sorry, you've been having to wait quite a while for business from the public.
I find this very fascinating.
Oh,
I actually want
good.
to come more often.
Oh, well,
My
good.
name is Renee Pearsall. I live at 1525 Maple. I have both good and bad in the community with my family. Everybody does. My family, who I care about, is suffering with meth. I've had some incidences. Back in November, I've talked with several people on the council. This drug dealer came to my house and kidnapped my 2 kids, and we couldn't find them. And I got a very lack of response from the police department, and I still get that today. I had an incident involving an assault. My teeth got fractured, and it was my ex-wife's husband. And the police, it seems like my attorney overheard them. There's betting against my family. I have 238 incidents reports involving my family or other people. When we call the city police for help, my car got, during the assault, he took my keys. My car was used in a burglary. My car was damaged. The police department thought it was a joke. I got no police report. My car is damaged. They came back to my house and robbed my house. I got a report. The police says, well, we don't know if you're going to help him or not. We at the department is very upset with you. I believe everybody should have a fair shot of, with their addictions, getting help. We have kids in common. He married my ex-wife. I've done nothing but asked for help in this matter. DHS took my kids because I failed to protect them. I've called. We've got it on video. The last incident, my new wife, Radine, called, and there was a gun. The other parties that involved with this brought a gun. We had no officers responding. My little son, Eric, was there. And I am irritated at the fact that I can't get a response from the police officers, and they consider my family a joke. I want it to be on record that I've asked several people here for help. The DA's office says it's up to the Albany Police Department, and I'm going to talk to Carter again. I want it meth. I wish we can have a zero tolerance policy for meth. If you're cited with meth, you automatically go to jail. If we can, I'll be picketing, signing that petition. We have to have a zero policy for meth. This dealer back in November who kidnapped my kids lived in another county, and they didn't want to jeopardize their investigation. They're jeopardizing my family, my kids. We do not trust anybody in the police department. We do not trust anybody in DHS office. We get nowhere. I am so tired of asking for help. These people live in these foreclosure houses. I've reported it several different times, took pictures, and I get told, we know. The crime rate with the stolen cars is the same group. I get threatened by this drug dealer. I call the police. I got threatened so much, I'm on my 3rd car since last November. They have threatened, they break my cars, they steal our stuff, and my family is a joke. They're gonna end up hurting me, my wife, or even the people that I'm trying to help, my ex-wife and her husband. I had to file restraining orders on them. I can't help them anymore. They have to get help on their own addiction. I cannot do it. We are out money, and do not spend $350,000 after you pay the FHA mortgage. I live on Maple Street. I love that house. And I get told that house right there, my next door neighbor tries to sell it next door. That house right there sells drugs. We don't sell the drugs. I've asked repeatedly for these people. I've got them on camera. I get nothing. I get nothing. No help, no nothing.
Mr. Pershall, I know you and I have had a conversation before, and there has been several conversations, so I don't think there's anything we can solve tonight, but I know you're addressing it to us.
At least if you guys can give me a letter of support and making the DAs prosecute these people would be great.
And we'll have the police department contact you tomorrow, and I think they have your contact.
They do. I just want
number.
it to be on record. Mayor.
Okay.
We're really upset. We don't know what else to do.
We're sorry you're having to go through that.
I mean,
Yeah,
there's
okay.
like 4 officers on the police force that I really respect and admire that do not treat us like that. And I wish they worked more often, but they do work a lot.
Okay.
And I thank you for your guys' service.
Yep, thank you. Thank you for sitting through our meeting for 3 hours, too.
I find it very interesting.
Oh, well, good. Some people say we're kind of boring, so, but yeah. Oh, okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Purcell. Okay, business from the public. Looks like Tom's got something.
Tom Cordier, 2240 Northwest Park Terrace, Albany. We're 3 hours in, and I understand that. I have placed a question to 2 councilmen regarding a question that I want to be asked of Jeanette Lawner, who was the city's self-described expert in urban renewal. As you know, I'm advocating to get as much CARA money put into the building of the fire and police stations that we can. I have framed a question, and I think you guys have a copy of that because Councilman Killam told me that he sent it to everybody. And so the first question I'll ask is, I don't know what it takes to get the question in front of Jeanette Lawner. If that takes a council resolution to do that, then I'll ask for that. If that's, I don't know how to get the question asked of her. So, has she been asked the question that I have submitted?
I don't even recall what the question was. Has everybody received an email, or?
I didn't receive it.
I sent
I
it.
don't know.
I sent it to council.
And when was it?
Well, it is, and I'm not going to tell you I know exactly what it says, but
I
it
mean, how
was,
long ago was it?
oh, yeah, two weeks maybe.
I think I do remember it. Yeah.
May I read the question, if I can help focus it?
Go ahead.
Be good.
The question gets asked after an assumption is made. Assume that the ARA, the Albany Revitalization Agency, made a decision to remove several non-TIF public projects from the current plan and substituted a project to fund $5 million for the construction of the replacement fire hall as a minor amendment. The maximum indebtedness of $56 million would be unchanged. The legal question is, if that decision were legally challenged as a violation of the substantial amendment definitions on page 18 of the urban renewal plan, what would the court likely decide? That is the question. Ms. Lawner gave, I think, a wonderful set of testimonies at her briefing that she gave the Public Safety Committee. That question of substituting is not addressed in the plan at all. The definitions of what a substantial amendment is is found in the plan, and almost exclusively, those definitions are increasing the number of projects and increasing the maximum indebtedness. And so the idea that I propose is that we might be able to substitute, remove some projects, and add the project, and I picked the $5 million out of the air. And so, as the city's expert on urban renewal, I'm trying to get the city to ask that council that question.
So are you asking that on behalf of the Public Safety Facilities Committee, or just yourself personally?
Just myself personally, because as you know, we have not met for 2 months, and we're not likely to meet again for 2 months. So I'm asking that question as a private, concerned citizen who also happens to be a member of the committee. Because the substitution question has never been asked that I know of. And it's a new question, and I think it's deserving of asking her that question.
You bring it up to the Public Safety Committee when you were there,
We
that
don't-
question.
I believe.
Yeah.
And I have not been directly involved in this, but my understanding is that Ms. Lawner has prepared a memorandum for the CARE meeting on the 17th, which covers the area of, I think it addresses your question, of whether or not the city can, what constitutes a substantial amendment or what doesn't, and whether or not substitution affects that. So I think that the short answer is that is a scheduled item for discussion on the 17th, and I would encourage you to come to that meeting. And
Unfortunately, I'm on the East Coast during that time, and so is there some reason why that letter, whatever she wrote, if it's available, couldn't be disclosed now?
Usually it'll be public record for the agenda item by the Friday before, the 17th. It should be out.
I understand that. We happen to be gone from September the 4th until the 23rd.
So
Okay,
on that Friday before, you'll be able to access it online when you're back east.
Maybe
And you'll
not
be able to
from
have
where
that.
I am. Maybe not from where I'll be.
Yeah.
But to be clear, I want some assurance that the substitution question gets asked.
Well,
Tom, my
we will see.
understanding, granted, this is just my understanding of the memorandum from Jeanette, and I don't even know if I've read the whole thing, but we did have a discussion, staff had a discussion with Ms. Lawner, and what I have heard her consistently say, and I think it includes the substitution issue, is that a change of that sort, including substituting different projects, would still be regarded, in her opinion, as a major amendment.
Okay?
Now, I would defer to our city attorney, because I think he participated in those discussions as well, and maybe I've misunderstood, but.
I did not participate in those discussions. Those discussions were between Kate and Jeanette.
Oh, okay.
I am confident that unless the question is framed exactly as Tom has suggested it, he is not going to be comfortable with the answer. I mean, I don't think she will have tried to answer it exactly as Tom frames it. I mean, she will certainly talk about the area. I think she will tell you that my recollection of what she has discussed was that it's a question of your risk tolerance. How much, if you are challenged, what's the risk of being challenged? If you are challenged, will the arguments be made persuasively and well? Yes or no? And what will a court likely do? Lawyers are not fortune tellers. I mean, we can give you, we think that this is a vulnerable risk, we think this is a very solid position, and I think she's going to say it's a question of risk tolerance. I don't remember specifically, but I don't think the question was framed exactly as Tom has framed it.
And that's the concern I have I remember when my children were young.
Because I don't think, when she was first asked this, I don't think Tom had yet framed exactly what he wanted the question to be. But every time you ask her, you're going to be spending money on further,
Right.
that's up to you.
Well, we're not going to be able to resolve this tonight, so, yeah.
One, I wanted to confirm to Tom that Tom and I had a meeting, and Skeet was in attendance. Tom raised the question of substitution. I had a similar question, but not exactly the same. I committed to Tom that I would try to make sure that that question got asked. I sent a memo, an email to Kate and to Jim, I believe, seeing if we can make sure that we address the substitution question. If Jeanette has authored a response to a similar question, I would suggest that we take the verbatim question that Tom has just posed, say, is your response that you previously drafted still the same, given Tom's question?
Right.
That way we have the exact, Tom's exact question. Her response is going to be, it's either the same or it's not, and if not, why? And I think that would bring it to a focal point, and we would address his specific question, and we would have had her address the generic question.
I'd appreciate that. That'd be great.
That'd be fine as long as it's the last question, Tom, and you don't.
Well, I don't know that it will be the last question. I don't think you will ever commit to asking the last question, and neither will I.
Jeanette, yes. So.
Does anybody have an estimate as to how much these questions cost?
And it'll be good to find out.
We have spent a significant amount of time and money consulting with Ms. Lahner over what is or is not considered a major amendment, and I think Jim gave an accurate characterization. It isn't as if Ms. Lahner gives us an absolute opinion that's guaranteed to stand up in court. What she has consistently said is, in my opinion, based on what I've heard from her say over and over again, is that she believes any substantial use of urban renewal money is probably a major amendment under the nature of our plan. Now, we can pose different questions to her, and maybe she'll change her assessment of the level of risk. I don't know. But
Well, if you will do what Floyd has asked or commented that would be reasonable to do, I would appreciate it.
So it costs a substantial amount every time we ask the same question?
No. I would say, a few minutes of her time is probably not significant. However, if you do it over and over again, it becomes significant.
It'd be nice to know how much it's going to cost. Yeah.
Well,
That's my concern.
I guess my opinion is that this is focusing on a major question for this community that has substantial financial impact. And in order to clarify and get our facts correct, we can argue over opinions. I would have a tendency to rely upon the advice of the person who's recognized to be the expert. If we get that opinion on the record, then I think we're further ahead.
Hope so.
Okay, all right. Anything else?
Nope.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else from business from the public? Okay, not seeing anyone. Council, you just have one agenda item for adoption of the consent calendar, and that's a set of minutes. If you have a revised list on your agenda, so item number 2 was pulled off.
Move adoption of the consent calendar.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. All right, and next is an appointment for Willard Sheppy to the Traffic Safety Commission, and this is an appointment for replacing Peggy Crosine. And I'll entertain a motion.
Move appointment. Second.
All right, any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Okay, business from the council. Rich, anything?
I just, the agenda item that was on with the consent calendar, the liquor license, I take it there has been contact? Yeah. And so that's out in limbo again? Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. All right, okay. Greg? No. Floyd?
No, thank you.
Okay, Bessie?
No, I just want to say that, I'm still looking for an appointment for the Planning Commission from Ward 3, and that's just to so the public knows, that's from Geary Street east over the freeway and part of South Shore. And so if anyone's interested, just contact me.
And I did find someone for mine, which will be on the next council meeting on that.
Same with mine, too.
On yours, too, yeah.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
all right, Bill?
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Dick?
Did you say the Traffic Safety Commission appointment was a replacement for
Yes.
someone?
Uh-huh, yeah.
And we'll make sure that someone gets a letter of appreciation.
Yeah, they always do. So, okay, and I didn't have anything. Wes? Nope, staff. Marilyn?
I'm sorry. I was contacted last week by Judge Murphy, he's a presiding judge for Lynn County, requesting a City of Albany representative to be appointed to the Lynn County Public Safety Coordinating Council. The primary purpose of the council is to advise the Lynn County Commissioners on matters involving the criminal justice system and the juvenile justice system. They also administer some state funds. The amount that they currently have is being used to reopen a wing at the jail and to provide some psychiatric assistance at the jail. The council meets 4 times a year at the jail for 1 hour each time. The appointment term is 2 years. Chief Latanzio is automatically a member of the council. The legislation also calls for at least 1 or 2 members from the city council or city administration of cities in Lynn County. City of Lebanon City Administrator is a member, and they're looking for someone from Albany. That could be the mayor, a councilor, Wes, or a designated staff member, depending on your pleasure.
So this is the same as our Willamette Criminal Justice Council with the Benton County one that I'm on, and Bessie's on, and Chief Latanzio's on. So, and this one doesn't meet as often?
No, 4 times a year.
4 times a year. So who would like to be on that?
I'd volunteer. I would fit in with them, okay?
Okay, all right. Was it just one appointment you needed?
Mm-hmm.
Marilyn? Okay.
Yep.
Was that okay, council?
Do you need an alternate in case, or just one?
He didn't mention an alternate.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
I'll get that information
All right.
to the judge tomorrow.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you. Okay, and anything else? All right, with that, we have a work session September 8th, regular session September 10th. Everybody have a wonderful long holiday weekend, and we adjourn.